Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Tate for the spoiler discussion of the year, perhaps one of the biggest films of the year, one of the most anticipated films of the year. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning has now been released in cinemas, and we are here to give our spoiler-filled thoughts on the final Mission Impossible film we have been led to believe. Maybe that's a great way to end the review later. We'll have a chat about finality and franchises, but before we get into anything at all, Tate, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. I have been completely thrown off guard by the old intro. That completely threw me for a second. I was like, whoa, what's going on there? But no, doing really good. Happy to discuss a spoiler-filled version of this film and really go into the gritty details of it.
Absolutely. And to people at home also wondering, I also got thrown off on the intro, not pressing play. When I was editing them all a couple of weeks ago, because we've got a Mission Impossible retrospective on the channel, we did it leading into part 1 back in 2023. We get to talk about the fact it's not called part 1 anymore. I guess this is the first proper Mission Impossible discussion on the channel since 2023. Which will be a big thing. But if you go into the link in the description, you'll find a link to the YouTube playlist or /podcast, they call them now. That's got every single Mission Impossible review we've done. We had some really cool guests over the 7 weeks we did that a couple of years ago. And for finality, I was like, we're going to get the backgrounds out. We're going to get this out. We've got to basically do it so there is an open and closed book. And the intro threw me. And I'm saying this because we don't do behind the scenes. I was editing and I was like, I don't want to, even though we've got a new intro and the new intro is lovely, I was like, God, the retrospective intros are good. And we've got them on the first 6. We had the different Mission Impossible themes. Thankfully, Paramount released the main theme a week before the film came out. So I was able to pull that legally and put it on the end. We haven't been copyright flagged. So yeah, the old intro, maybe it will come back in another retrospective, because it does work for retrospectives. But we are doing a spoiler discussion. We've both seen the film twice now. We were both at the UK press screening on Wednesday the 14th, was it? 13th or 14th. The Wednesday before last. You then saw it at the regional premiere. I then re-saw it today in IMAX. So we've both seen the film twice. And we know it's now released. So yes, we're doing a spoiler discussion on the opening weekend. But if you haven't seen the film, please don't watch any further. We will be spoiling it. We're talking about all the major details. If you have seen it, please comment your thoughts, comment along, give us your other Mission Impossible films, your favorites, all that sort of thing, because we are live. We have somewhat of a loose plan, sticking back to our retrospective. We've pulled up the old schedule system. Obviously, this film has just come out, so we don't get to do the whole in-depth behind the scenes, but we'll be talking about, I guess, the last 2 years, right? Like the gap in between, the retitling. There's so much to talk about. So, people at home, please do comment your thoughts on Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Everything your thoughts. There's no bad thought. We do want to read them. If you're not watching it live, that's not a problem. You can comment and we'll pick them up after the video. So, yeah, Tate, let's get into this. And I guess where we'll go sticking with the older ones, we're going to start with the IMDb plot synopsis, which is: our lives are the sum of our choices. Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. Kind of the most self-explanatory today. But where I want to go with you is 2 years later, I want your thoughts on Dead Reckoning heading into The Final Reckoning. And then let's segue that into a talk on the rebranding of a part 1 and part 2 being no more.
Do you know what? I've spoken to a lot of people about Dead Reckoning part 1, or now it's just called Dead Reckoning. And a lot of people, I didn't realize, weren't the biggest fans of the film. I really enjoyed Dead Reckoning. Like, I really thought it was quite a high-octane action film. It actually had stakes to it. I thought kind of the villain introduction in general was really good. I enjoyed it as an action film. I think the big stunt really kind of shone from the film, and the fact they did so much of the behind-the-scenes video of them filming it leading up to the film, that got me more excited than any of the trailers. That got me more on board than anything. And all of the things about kind of him filming in COVID and all of that, the meltdown that he had, which was, I guess, very justified at this point with kind of, what he was looking to do, which was, film on a set and not be, completely shut down because of, COVID breaches and everything like that. I enjoyed Dead Reckoning. I really did. And I guess that's why coming into this film, I was excited, but I was a little bit apprehensive of how they could complete the story, what direction they would take it in, and kind of how they would finish off the franchise. I guess we'll have to talk about the fact that, I mean, it's a spoiler discussion. It's an open end. Like, it's a very open end. They could continue if they wanted to. They could continue with Tom Cruise or without Tom Cruise, and that's kind of where they've left it on the table. But yeah, I really enjoyed part one.
I'm the kind of same as you that I think if I'm totally honest, leading up to it, some of my most anticipated films of 2023, it's probably been, I mean, we're looking at this now, right? If this is the closed door, which I think it may be, we're looking at a 30-year series that has given us 8 films and has set an all-time high bar for the future of action films, practical stunts, all those sorts of things. And Dead Reckoning was a weird one because I very much enjoyed it. I still very much do enjoy it. But I think when you're following on that just incredible streak of films 3 to 6, particularly most people would say 4, 5, and 6, but I'm a massive fan of MI3. To maintain that level and then do a 2-parter is probably one of the ballsiest things the series has done. And I think to an extent the film is hampered by being a 2-parter, which, still looking at it as a 2-hour 40 film. I rewatched it the week before last, just before the press screening. I then actually rewatched it with my family because they watched it today. So I've seen it actually since watching part 1, which is really interesting, by the way. But I enjoyed it. I think, obviously, what we didn't know at the time, the film bombed. It financially wasn't profitable. It came out the 10 days before Barbenheimer, which we know is the reason why. We'll be talking about IMAX later. This film was not released in premium screens. It did not have an IMAX release. It didn't have premium screen releases. It was not reformatted to IMAX, which is a really big thing. I spoke about this in Water Preview. It's a really big thing for me, and we'll get to the action sequences because we are seeing in the years that have followed how important gaining these screens are for blockbuster films, for audiences to attend. And we now know in these 2-year window, a lot of articles have come out, and Tom Cruise is no longer working with Paramount post this film. He is signed with Warner Brothers. All of his new projects are going to be Warner Brothers films. They're not going to be Paramount. This ends like a multi-decade relationship. And apparently, if I'm going off the article, it was probably about a year or two ago I read this now, so it's a bit different. He told them the film could not come out in July 2023 because of Indiana Jones, because of Barbie, because I know obviously Indiana Jones bombed, but it was one of the packed summer blockbuster seasons, and it all came out in the space of a month. And Indiana Jones bombed. This bombed. Barbie didn't. Oppenheimer didn't. Where did everyone go? Barbenheimer. So to know that's a key part of him, leaving, to then have Dead Reckoning Part 1 renamed to Dead Reckoning, and us being told, Mission Impossible 8 is now just Mission Impossible 8 TBC, not Dead Reckoning Part 2. I think there's obviously stuff that happened behind the scenes, and they're a bit more apparent. And I think that has segued into the marketing, if I'm approaching into Final Reckoning now, that when it was called Final Reckoning in the last year, I was like, yeah, it just feel like it's going to be the final film. Like, we know it's a 2-parter. And I guess where we can go with this, Dune's a bit different because it's source material, right? There was one book split in 2. I get calling that part 1 and 2. When it's like an original concept, granted it's a series, when it's an original story within that, they don't need Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. It wasn't Avengers Infinity War and Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1's actually detrimental, and Scott from Spy Hard, I remember, was quite vocal about that at the time. And I would say he's correct in that if you're the general audience who don't care, you're a general audience, you don't necessarily have a favourite, you're just going to watch what everyone's on about. Barbenheimer won that summer, and you'd say, oh, yeah, that was a Part 1, I'll go in Part 2. And
that's what modern culture kind of with cinema is all about, and I guess with streaming as well. People don't want to wait around for, they don't want to wait around for, to watch Part 1 and then wait a long time and watch Part 2. They'll watch both parts together when it finally happens. It's a similar thing with Cobra Kai's kind of final season. Like, it was split into 3 parts. No one watched Part 1 when it came out. No one watched Part 2. I think some people watched it when Part 3
did,
came out.
Only for the concept of let's get reviews out. Oh, do you want some Karate Kid gossip? Not to detract. The Karate Kid film comes out next Wednesday, the 28th here in the UK. The press screening is also next Wednesday evening after the film's been released. So that's all you need to know about what that film's going to be. Sorry, follow-up conversation. Karen.
No, that was kind of it. It's basically a lot of people would have been put off by the fact that it was Part 1 of 2, especially if they knew that, the Part 2 is coming out next year. I'll go watch Double Bill, or I'll go watch them both next year at some point. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't draw you into the cinema by having, oh, it's part 1 of 2. You're going to have to come see this to watch part 2. People are going to be like, well, no, I'm going to watch it before part 2, but it doesn't mean I have to watch it immediately right now. So,
and I'm going to say, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, because you spoke well about, right, how the behind the scenes trailer for Dead Reckoning did more for you than normal trailers, which I agree. I was in the same camp. Like, give me a behind the scenes feature on that stunt. That worked for us as film people. And it clearly didn't work for the general public, because the amount of discussions I've seen, not just online, with that first film, was every single person in the world knew about Tom Cruise jumping off doing the motorbike stunt. And it is absolutely a great way to market the film. It seems like the film was only marketed by Tom Cruise jumping off the cliff. And the train going off, right, both of which are unluckily caught via cameras, people recording that lived in, I think, Derbyshire. It was filmed at the time. So the two big stunts were in the public eye before the film had trailers, were then in the trailers, were then in all the TV spots. My own mini criticism of part 1 is not necessarily a big criticism, but the train sequence is great, but when it goes off the cliff, because obviously they've had to CG it for very obvious reasons, it doesn't work as well. And the same with the cliff. Like, because we saw the motorbike Tom Cruise driving up at 100 times on boxes and a ramp, when it's actually a cliff head, it doesn't look as good. So when I watched part 1, it was like, oh, like, not that was it, because that's greedy. But part 2, we don't know anything about the submarine until we're watching it. And that's going to be a huge part of the discussion later, that, yes, we knew about the biplane stunt. And not all of it. We'd known a lot about it, but they very intentionally hid everything about the submarine sequence, is probably a better term, because it's not a stunt as such. There's so much going on with that. But it's one of the most atmospheric sequences of the year so far. And will no doubt be in discussions with a lot of people what's the best part of the series or film, for me personally. So I think, not rudely, a lot of lessons have been learned from Dead Reckoning into Final Reckoning. The marketing for this film has very much been, this is the final Mission Impossible film. Like, everyone's back together for one final time. It's Tom Cruise one final time. It's the last time we're going to see Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, etc., etc., etc. We've seen today, I just checked on the way home, the box office. I know we're not going to sit here doing box office numbers, but it's had the highest opening day of a Mission Impossible film in the box office, which is a great indication for this weekend that it's not necessarily bombing. This is going to be one of the most expensive films ever made, with the budget between $300 to $400 million. And I'm just going to say this early. I'm not saying, this film's going to bomb. I don't think it will to an extent. It's going to perform very well. But if this isn't a smash hit, it made like $1 billion profit, whatever, I personally don't care, because where my modern criticisms of Hollywood at present goes is these astronomical budgets on screen that you just can't see. Yes. I can see why and how this film in particular was one of the most expensive films ever made. When you have a real-life naval warship for the purpose of a 5-minute scene being used with Top Gun planes jittering off, I understand. And it adds stakes to it. And I'll talk about this later, but I just really quickly, because I know we normally talk numbers, what are your thoughts on the budgeting side of things?
I mean, it's, a lot of practical stunts, a lot of practical effects, and I think that's worth the budget. We look at films this year like The Electric State, which no one has gone and watched. No one even really... The only thing that people talk about that film is it's Netflix's biggest flop ever. Like, no one watched it. It cost a ridiculous amount of money. And once again, the Russos are kind of being sent through the mill for films that they're not doing inside the Marvel Universe. But budget-wise, I think a film earns its budget if it has things like this film does. Like, if it does those practical effects, if it does those kind of like hiring of various different things and stuff like that, which are needed, integral parts of the story, and make it exciting for the viewers, I think that's justifiable. I think in modern cinema, a lot of films kind of get away with, using green screens or CGI or the volume, and then kind of say that's the budget. And I'll use the comparison here of, I don't know what the budgets are between the two, but Andor looks way better than Mandalorian. But we were talking about how good Mandalorian looked a while ago, but Andor feels real because of the real sets that are there. And I'm sure that would have cost more than sticking people in the volume for the other things. So I think there's got to be a balance, but at the same time, like, I think this film earned kind of, everything that was coming from budget sides.
I've seen a tweet. So Mission Impossible is to open with a 70 mil plus opening weekend. So I've seen someone reply, quote, a 70 mil opening weekend for a $400 million budget isn't good enough. Half the budget, it's a different story. You have this fucking budget and you don't have the film. The film needs it because this stuff isn't cheap to do. To have access to naval warships, to do submarine stunts that we don't... There's no behind the scenes on these yet. I want to know, was there 1 or 2 submarines involved? I've got so many questions still.
I think as well, because he's like a producer of the film, because he's high up, Tom Cruise isn't making these films to make money. He's rich enough. He's making these films because he wants to go and do these stunts. He wants to tell these stories. So I don't think people consider that this is like his baby. This is like his child at this point. And he just wants to make a good, entertaining film. He wants to tell the stories and he wants to go and do these wacky stunts. This is almost like a kind of, an enabling mechanism for him to go and do this shit. Like, No,
it is, though, isn't it? He can't do... It's like the James Cameron conversation, right? When 20th Century Fox said to James Cameron, this Avatar film's too expensive, and he sat there like, you're sat in the building that Titanic paid for, which is one of the greatest mic drops ever. And you are right. I didn't even think of it. As the producer, Tom Cruise wants to go and do this. Chris McHugh wants to go and do this. Top Gun Maverick made, was it $1.3, $1.4 billion in the box office? Whether that gave them creative license to then spend more on mission, which it absolutely did, by the way, they can do that. And because it's the final films, right? It's a 2-parter. And COVID obviously made things more expensive. This is, there has to be a conversation around the fact that for these 2 films, there was around 6 years total. COVID delays, strike delays, of course, as well, being part of it. Like, to get through both of these is a miraculous achievement and have them come out the same way. And the reality is we are not going to have any action star do this anymore. Like, Tom Cruise is the last action star. There are very few people that can get away with that. I'd even say you look at directors, very few people can go and do whatever they want. Christopher Nolan's one. I'm going to start making the case that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start seeing... not Jordan Peele. Oh my God, I've just forgotten the cine director, Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler will be the closest one. Depending on what comes after Sinners, he will start to get those. Here's 150 mil. Let's start creeping you up and up and up because you're proving it. I've got a great comment by Carl, and this goes back to what I spoke about Dead Reckoning. To me, the last Mission Impossible didn't work as well as they showed all the stunts in the trailer, and the main stunt was shown over and over and over again. When you actually saw the film, there were no surprises, and this is kind of it. And Carl, if you're still watching, let me know your thoughts on the submarine sequence because I didn't know this, and I've got to say, I went with my sister today. I went with my whole family. Yesterday, they announced the vinyl, and you can see them behind me down there. The first 4 in a box. They've not released 5 yet, but 6, 7, and now 8 have been announced. So they're going to then do 5 to round out the series. The vinyl covers have always been the big stunt for the film, or a sequence of the moment, which kind of inspired our thumbnails, if anyone's curious about that we try to do the big moments, bar the final one, which I've just slapped Tom Cruise's face on it. There's also, because the submarine's not marketed, I didn't want to pop it on there. When I showed it yesterday on the photo, she's like, why is there a plane? She goes, I haven't seen any trailers. And I was like, oh, like, it's not a spoiler. I was like, oh, like, you just haven't seen the plane in advertising anywhere? Like, no. And I'm like, okay. But everyone knew about the motorbike going off the top. And I think the marketing for part 2 has been much superior to part 1.
It's been different. The marketing, they've gone with a very, very different thing. And I mean, I guess this is kind of where we go into kind of the start of the film, at least. The entire first 10 minutes, I would say, is pretty much the entire marketing for the film. And I guess films are meant to sell people in the first 10 minutes and get people on board with everything. But no, they literally go back through all of the last Mission Impossible films, kind of linking it all up together, reintroducing Mission Impossible 3, showing all of his last kind of missions, all of his dangerous stunts and everything like that, showing all the people he's met along the way, like everything like that, all in the first kind of thing. And that's pretty much what the advertising of the film was. It was, this is the final mission, or at least it's going to possibly be the final mission. So we're just going to show you all the things that have come beforehand. And now this is kind of the link up, the tie-in to kind of the final episode. Everything from film 1 to film to this film was going to be linked. So we're just going to show you that in the first 5-10 minutes, get you on board. And that's also going to be basically our trailer for the film with a few shots of, like 1 or 2 shots from the submarine sequence, because we know he's going to go and find Sevastopol. And One or two shots from kind of the end sequence as well, because people know about the plane and everything like that. Everything else in the film is basically a complete mystery, and you have to fill in the gaps. But at least for the first 10 minutes, I say 10 minutes. The opening sequence is 25 minutes long.
It reminded me of
the title credits.
It reminded like No Time to Die. It's like you actually have like a whole thing happening before
it's
you
like
get
a short film before the film.
Yeah, I've got another great comic art. I purposely stay away from more trailers now. I like to be surprised when watching the film for the first time. You know what? I've hit this point, so we don't do reactions. We never have. That's not our thing. I can do trailer discussions, like when I'm Star Wars or something I want to decipher. I can, but I try to avoid stuff, particularly as you get closer to the film releases. They throw things at you like, "Hey, here's a spoiler. Enjoy."
The absolute worst one at the moment for those who are going to cinemas is the How to Train Your Dragon trailer, where I've seen How to Train Your Dragon so many times. You watch the trailer for the new film, the live action one, it is the entire film. They don't leave anything. It is just a shot for shot remake, and you can tell that straight away. And that's horrible, because anyone who's previously seen the film will be possibly put off watching it in live action purely out of the fact that they just go back and watch the original instead. Like, I don't think it's going to draw new people in. And I think trailers nowadays need to find that balance between kind of like, what exactly do you want to show to advertise the film?
Yeah.
I think part one did a good job of, hey, come watch the film just to see this stunt. And dear God, that I know we've been discussing it, but that worked on my family at least. Like, my dad was like, oh my God, I've just seen the trailer where it's just like the build up to the stunt. I'm going to go watch the film on the biggest screen possible just so I can see that stunt. And that's fine. This film went with a different tactic of, if you've seen any of the previous Mission Impossibles, you should come watch this film.
And and if you've seen the previous Mission Impossibles, you know that Tom Cruise is going to do some mental shit. Like, that is literally Mission Impossible. Carl's also had a Rogue Nation still his favorite. Great film. It's maybe a conversation.
I mean, a ranking video will probably have to be done at some point, but
that is on my schedule for Monday. I haven't done anything, but it's on the calendar. It's on the calendar I've not updated in a while because Andor's all over the place. But I'd love to do a discussion on just the stunts, like even you could rank the stunts would be fun. There's so much you could do. I worked out my local Cineworld trailers, adverts, 20 minutes late. I'll always go to it. Okay, right. Caveat. I know this is sad. I know that there are 27 minutes of adverts at my Cineworld, right? When we sat down for Lilo and Stitch the other day, they started the film after 14 minutes. And I was like, oh, the amount of times I've bought a ticket, not intentionally gone in late, but I've booked like a 5 o'clock screening, and I'll get there at 5:10 straight after work as I finish at 4:30. I am on edge. So when we were there today, 27 minutes ago, I was like, that was very strange for Lilo and Stitch. Obviously, family film, but never seen Cineworld cut the adverts that short before. But as you kind of said, like the opening of this film, and we'll talk, we've got a schedule. We've had an intro as long as No Time to Die, 23 minutes. But the opening is literally the Mission Impossible recap. Like, they could have just released that scene to the public with what the mission is, and that would have done as well. Like, it was very cool to see it back. I know some people haven't liked that. Josh Barton, friend of the channel, he really doesn't like them repetitively playing clips from old films. Now, I don't mind it. There are a couple of moments where it felt too forced, like when we get reintroduced to Pom. Paris is the character played by Pom Klementieff, and then they play a clip from 7. I am like, okay, your audience can't be that
seen
stupid.
The previous film.
Yeah. I understand it for MI1 with William Donlow later on, because there is that context of people wouldn't recognize this guy unless you really know it was him from MI1.
Yeah.
And it's probably a lovely surprise for them if they didn't know, and they get to the plane scene where they reintroduce themselves, which is one of the most emotional scenes of the film, if I'm completely honest. But I will say, just my initial thoughts on this film before we get into it fully. It's been 2 screenings, right? I mean, you had a little chat before we went live. That's why a little bit later. The first screening is in the spoiler-free review. I love the film, but I had some serious issues with the opening acts. Very clunky, a lot going on. Probably structurally the hardest thing for them to do on this production. Like, it seems like they had nailed exactly what they wanted to do in Act 2 and 3. But the opening act, for me, was just a bit all over the place. But by the time I got to the ending of the film, I was more than satisfied because of the bar of which Acts 2 and 3 went at for me. And I don't normally do this. I not look at other reviews. I tend to do all of our stuff before I look at others. Mark Commode did a really good video this week on Mission Impossible, and he basically said Act 2 and 3 are some of the best you'll see ever. And he's like, the general audience will not care about a clunky opening act because they're the general audience. They're going to leave that film blown away by what they've watched for 2 hours 50. But he said, as you have a responsibility as a film reviewer, him, not me, I don't call myself that it is my job to say I had some serious issues, which was the opening act, which are structurally a problem. But at the end of the film, it's fine. And that's kind of been my narrative when I've spoken about it to people. Like, I love this film, but I can't. Part of me is like, I can't sit here and say it's the best. But at the same time, when I was watching on the second viewing today, I was like, is this the best? And where I'm going to go with this, and I think this is valid. Now, this is a 30-year franchise, but there aren't 30 films, unlike Marvel. I started thinking about Avengers Endgame, and this is a terribly interesting comparison. Avengers Endgame is it's the end of the MCU thing, which obviously it wasn't, but people say it is still, which is fair. Most people will still say The Winter Soldier is the best film, right? It's 2 hours, 10 minutes, is bang on neat. But Endgame is tying together this 25-film saga in the most satisfying ending, in bringing everything together that ever came to be. And I started thinking of the final reckoning as Avengers Endgame. Now, thankfully, obviously, we know that Ethan Hunt doesn't die. I thought he might have at the first movie, but I'm glad he doesn't, if I'm honest, the more I've thought about it. This film, Fallout would be The Winter Soldier. It is maybe by quality the best of the series. And I'm sorry, I'm not doing it as a ranking now, but I'm just trying to give my thoughts and watching again, saying this is what I was thinking watching it. But Fallout, its stakes aren't about the world and everything coming together, and that when you get to the ending of Fallout, okay, there's great tension. It's still one of the best action films ever made. But it's such a different film to this, and it's a completely different story. It's got different resolutions, different characters. And I think where I'm going with this, my initial and final reckoning after today is this might be the end game of the Mission Impossible series, where it has tied everything together in a neat bow. If it disappears and goes away, it ends on the highest of the highs for me personally, giving us, I think, the best action sequences of the entire series, which is a pretty fucking mighty. And we'll get to the stunts later. We'll give them their own due, their own zone, as we did with the older ones. But I'm really conflicted on how I feel about this because I don't do stars often. I moved up to a 5 on Letterboxd on my second viewing. Whereas I know your second viewing, I know your second viewing was the day after we saw it. But I think because I had a 9-day gap to simmer and think and then go into today quite neutral, it's elevated it to me, which I didn't think it would. I thought it'd be like a Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, please don't dislike this film less. Like, please don't, because obviously it wasn't a Rise of Skywalker anyway, but I very rarely book a film multiple times before I've seen it now because of Rise of Skywalker. But I'm curious at your initial thoughts on 1 and 2 viewing.
First viewing, I thought it was okay. I would say it was a good kind of ending to the franchise. Second viewing, my opinion didn't change, but the highs of the film for me were heightened and I enjoyed them more. What I would say the negatives I have for the film became a lot more obvious. And I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the kind of opening being really slow. On second viewing, the opening was not as slow, but at the same time, it is quite plodding and very much set up. It's like you almost wish that it was a separate entity, like they released
Sorry, I know. It's like it's a drinking game, isn't it? Say the entity, have a shot.
Yeah, exactly. I wish they kind of released it as almost like a short film to tie into the movie that people could watch online to get you through that. But of course, there's a lot of big spoilers in that scene. You have Luther dies. So it's like, it's one of those where you kind of need it integral within the film, but it is slow. You're there to watch an action film. And for the first kind of, however many minutes, you don't get a ridiculous amount of action. What you do get is a lot of exposition and a lot of setup. The rest of the film, I think, pacing-wise, does better in Acts 2 and 3, a lot better. But yeah, when we get onto the stunts, I'll come across kind of my other gripe, which it's going to be a very interesting discussion, I think, because I think we've got very different opinions on that.
Yeah, I think you'll get shot by the internet when we get to that point.
Mm.
But it's still worth having the chat. Like, we're not just
Mm.
here for the sake of positivity. Like, we are entitled to our own thoughts as we go
Not
into
to
it.
say that I didn't dislike the film. I do stars on Letterboxd on my own account for any new releases that I go and watch, and I gave this a 3.5 star, which I think is quite harsh because I gave part 1 a 5 star. I really enjoyed part 1. But at the same time, like, from the things I've also seen this year and kind of, just how the vibe I got from the film and just everything like that, it just didn't excite me in the way that part 1 did.
And I think with that, let's segue that part, because a big part of my reaction to this film was my experience watching it. Particularly, one of my biggest criticisms of part 1, which we spoke about earlier, is Dead Reckoning did not have IMAX, which we know. This is by the way, people who've had this conversation have thought Spider-Man's going to get a day, not just because now Doomsday and everyone have. Spider-Man was scheduled to come out 2 weeks after Odyssey next year. Spider-Man doesn't start filming till the summer. That's less than 12 months to do a Spider-Man film and post, which isn't happening.
Yeah.
On top of that, Nolan working with IMAX. That's like, one collaboration itself. Now this has been announced as the first ever film shot fully on IMAX film reel. They aren't taking Odyssey out of IMAX after 2 weeks. Odyssey's going to get
a month
4
or
5 weeks
more
up on IMAX.
Yeah.
And Sinners, right? Sinners had 2 weeks, and they put it back in as soon as the Thunderbolts contract was done. Sinners went straight back in on IMAXs, and I understood that for 1 week until Mission came out. And I love Thunderbolts, but Sinners was shot on IMAX for that tech. And this film utilized IMAX, and I understand the issues of part 1, right? They didn't get those formats; they were pissed off. And I'll be totally honest. That did dampen my mood a little bit watching them. I remember being at the press screening, yes, very blessed to be at them when we get to go to them. And it was at the Odeon, Leicester Square. And I was gutted because it's not an IMAX screen. And I remember me and you were talking before, I was like, I'm not going to go to London if this isn't an IMAX screening. I'm being totally open. There's IMAX premieres the day after the press screening, better be an IMAX. The plane sequences are advertised at IMAX, they're going to show it to us, and they did. Yeah. And the IMAX experience, along with the cinema experience, it enhances this film a little bit more for me. So I'm a little bit more biased too on how my experience is in watching it. But so much of my opinions on film is those cinematic experiences now. Like, I'll always advocate. Sorry to sound like Tom Cruise on this press tour, but I will advocate for the cinema experience, because as I've got older, that's what attracts me more into watching films. Is I want to sit down in that room, not knowing anyone, just sat there, whether it be myself, be with friends, be with other people. I just experience something, seeing new technologies being done, things being put on screen I didn't know could be put on screen. That's what made me fall in love with film, and that's what I want to look for, and I will keep seeking to find with new releases. And this film delivered all of that in regards to an experience type. I don't know if it was the same for you. I know obviously everyone's got differing thoughts on that, but how was the cinema for yourself, both viewings, because you went back to back?
Yeah. So first experience, I mean, this is one of those things. Like, whenever we get invited to these press screens, stuff like that, especially if they're in London, in Cineworld, they are a spectacle because it is, a massive IMAX screen. It's huge. Like, it's really fun to just go into that kind of cinema experience. And we've said this before, going to a public screening is very different from going to a press screening. Press screenings tend to have kind of larger reactions to various different things. Almost say kind of more like an American kind of audience reaction, people laughing, cheering.
Marvel,
you get those kind of things. Yeah, you get those kind of things.
You get
in
influences,
those screenings.
Unfortunately.
You do. But the laughs are louder, the kind of, all of that. The people clap at the end or they don't clap at the end. It's one of those things. You don't really get that in any other screening. Like, you don't finish a film and you hear people clapping like the plane's landed. It's very different. So I always enjoy the experience of going up to London. I always enjoy going to see those films. It's nice being able to go and do those things. I experienced a very different premiere, I guess, technically, because it was the regional premiere with them doing it across all different IMAXs across the country at my local one. And that was very, very different vibes. For one thing, people in my screening thought that it was an actual premiere. People dressed up for it, which was very interesting. People were walking in with their phones out, filming, walking into the audience and stuff like that, as if it was an actual premiere, which was a bit weird. When the film started, absolute dead silence. The only reaction we got was from Gabriel's death. That was pretty much it. You know, a couple of gasps and a couple of like, you know, to a couple of the sequences and stuff like that. Apart from that, like absolute dead silence, standard what you get for a film screening and stuff like that. No, very, very different. Hilariously, the local screening that I went to ended up having more photo opportunities than the London one did, which we made a comment on before. It was quite funny. London had nothing. Normally they have something that you can like a film poster. I mean, you were saying that O2 were doing something in their stores about like you can hang off the plane.
Hang off a plane. Like and I know to talk press screens is very like, oh, look at us, we get to do this. And, you know, part of it's publicity by studios, right? Influencers go. We're not influencers, but influencers get invited. They're influencing, I don't know, fashion or makeup, and they'll be invited because they're getting the photo ops. They're encouraging people to go. But apparently, I don't believe that, but it's their selfish egos. I was good about a photo op, not because I made the effort of having a shave and wearing a Top Gun top, but it's just like, it's encouragement. It's people to go. It's them. Tom Cruise loves his little photo ops with his popcorn buckets. If you see some of the funny videos, and I just wish there'd been something like Marvel go all out. And I know that Marvel don't necessarily need as much, but it is like, oh, look, like you get to go chill with your friends and you get photos of cool things. And if they're shutting down a cinema, it's the day before the world premiere, the global premiere, as they called it. They're in Cannes at that point in time. They could have just chucked a fucking photo up on. Like, I just wanted to get a photo.
I mean, there was one in my local. There was one in my local.
You had a cardboard stand.
There was technically more than one because they had a little Tom Cruise cut out at the top of the escalators as well. So it's like, you know, you got two different things. You can either have a photo with a cardboard Tom Cruise, or you can like take a photo next to the giant poster with the planes and everything like that. Well, that's a lot more than what they had there. But anyway, those were the two different cinema experiences. Yeah. Very, very different. But like I said, like the second time round, I had some things heightened, some things kind of dampened and stuff like that with the film. One thing that doesn't change throughout all of it, I guess, is, you know, Tom Cruise always brings the energy. And I guess this is his final film. He gave it everything. He always does in all of his films. It's not like he was like, oh, this is my final film, I'm throwing it in or anything like that. It's not a tired performance like you get from Harrison Ford in the latest Indiana Jones film or anything like that. It is like a passion project, pure film that he's been doing ever since '96. That, you know, he's still continuing on now.
His dedication to the series, I think, is almost unparalleled. And as you said, he's a producer on this, and he isn't afraid to switch things around, whether that be writers, be directors, be composers. We'll get to composers later. I think it's really interesting with this one again. You know, with the so-called Paramount issues behind the scenes. I personally think he's probably been given even more freedom after Dead Reckoning. After Dead Reckoning for final. Probably in the name title as well as a great many other things. But let's talk Chris McQuarrie. I'm going to try and format this. So yeah, Chris McQuarrie's returned for his fourth Mission film as a director, and he co-wrote or did a final draft of Mission Impossible 4 from memory. So yeah, he has directed five.
Four was Brad Bird, wasn't it? Three was J.J. Abrams. Who did the first? Was it something? No. Brian De Palma was the first one. John Woo was the second.
So McQuarrie's come in, directed 4 in a row, essentially made Ghost Protocol I look at as a Goldfinger, right? It was from that point onwards that they knew the Mission Impossible formula. We're going to have this humongous stunt. We're going to build the story towards it. It's going to be an integral part of what we do. But we've got these other things. So we've got the tech guy. We've got the orders. We've got this, that, the other. The series really became its own at Ghost Protocol for me. MI3 is the big part in that. But once you hit Ghost Protocol, that's the Mission Impossible that they've gone to be, reputation-wise, quality-wise.
Yeah, I can see it like that as well. Because, like, for me at least, from talking Bond, I prefer From Russia with Love to Goldfinger, but I respect Goldfinger for setting the mold.
Which is more like Mission Impossible 1, right? Like, it is the drama, it is the espionage, it is the story. And we get some great Mission Impossible references in this, but I think at this point in time, when you look at McQuarrie, you look at Tom Cruise, you know, they lived together during COVID, they had to be together, they've worked on these films for over a decade with one another. They've got probably one of the best working relationships from director to actor without having a reputation of that. Like, because it isn't prestige dramas as such, I think it's that who's the guy that wants to do this stuff? Okay, that's Tom Cruise. But who's the person that is able to normally write that and actually create that? How is someone going to make that work on the big screen with the actor? And it's this bond between the two that they are just on the same wavelength. Like the Light the Fuse podcast is a great one, and they've had so many interviews with the pair of them together. But Tom Cruise is always praising everyone around him. You know, he isn't. Of course, it's a very egocentric film. It's probably the most egocentric film, and I mean that as a praising of it, because at this point, it's like Daniel Craig is not bigger than James Bond, but Tom Cruise is bigger than Ethan Hunt.
Yeah.
And Daniel Craig dictating the final Bond film is to an extent worthy of criticism, because the franchise was there before, during, and after his lifetime, and it will continue to do so. Yes, Mission Impossible was a show in the 60s, but it was Tom Cruise that made it happen in the 90s. He was after that from the 80s, the rights. He has made it his own. And as much as he is Ethan Hunt, the conversations were Ethan Hunt is Tom Cruise more so than Tom Cruise is Ethan Hunt. Daniel Craig is James Bond. James Bond is not Daniel Craig.
Correct.
And that's how I feel that McHugh's come in, and as the director that they've made it, again, hit that next level. And I can't really fault... I don't want to say I can't fault the direction of this when I can. This feels like the most difficult film they've had to make. Maybe because it's the final one. Maybe because it's the first time they've had like an official follow-up. Like we had a part 1 and a part 2, but the part 2 is to end the series. The opening act feels like... I'm not saying reshoots. We know how long this film went on for. When they're zigzagging between, like, suddenly we're in the embassy in London. Suddenly we're at a party. Suddenly we're in the prisons of Austria. It's kind of felt like, were there 3 or 4 different opening sequences that they were working on? Were they trying to make it work? Eddie Hamilton, the editor, has been a huge part of the series, and he's an incredible editor, so well on those action sequences too, blending different scenes, putting them together. That opening, running at 100 miles an hour, didn't work for me. And I'm not saying I don't think it's an issue of the direction, but I guess to an extent it is. I'm just really torn on it because, as you said earlier, it sets everything up as Mission Impossible films do. And I'm so more than satisfied with the resolutions that I'm sort of letting it not slide, but it has been a big discussion since the press screening, since the public have seen it, since reviews have come out, that the opening is clunky. But for me, maybe it doesn't take away from his direction, because I don't know what other director you'd want to do this. Obviously, like, I'm not going to say the obvious Nolan thing. Like, we all want to see Nolan work with Tom Cruise. But it's like Macquarie's one of the guys that could probably say no to Tom Cruise, but in the right way of, I don't think that would work, but let's see if we can make it work. And if it can't work, how can we then make it work? He seems more collaborative as a director. And I think that works so much better for the series, and has done for the series, which is why they're justified in getting to these outrage. You know, we'll get to stunts later, but some of the big stunts from the other films haven't had an impact as such on the story. But the big stunts in this are the story. And I think that's where it swaps for me compared to the earlier films. But what do you think of the direction? Because it's weird to talk about, but it's
I mean, the direction's always good with these films, but I'm going to point out something that I know that on both screenings, I heard at least a groan or something coming from it. And that is the opening sequence, and it's the part where they're being tortured by Gabriel and they escape, and then it's the cutaway and looking at Hayley Atwell's face instead of seeing the action sequence. That got groans in both screenings. That's not good direction. That's you're an action franchise and you're cutting away from the action to make a cheap joke. And I know the series has had some humor in there and stuff like that, but it just felt very off. And I know that the films, is, like show don't tell and stuff like that, and all of that stuff. But at the same time, like, there were some things with the direction in this film that did actually grind me. There were some choices in this film that did actually kind of get to me. Some sequences, brilliantly directed. I mean, submarine sequence is phenomenal. Whether you call it a stunt or an entire sequence, just, complete silence and worked really well. But other sequences, and this is I'm going to go into it. I'm going to talk about it. This is where maybe I get a bit of criticism. I wasn't a big fan of the plane chase at the end. And the reason why I wasn't a big fan of it is purely down to, I guess, the editing. And I guess direction comes into that as well. I know they didn't have a ridiculous amount of footage. I know that you can't get that much footage when you're doing a stunt like that. But when you think back and look back at all of the other great stunts from Mission Impossible films, the ones that really stick out to you, whether it is the Burj Khalifa, whether it is hanging onto the plane in Rogue Nation, what was the stunt from Fallout, the big stunt? Was that the plane one?
But yeah, where did you start with Fallout? You've got Tom Cruise on the helicopter.
The helio jump or whatever it is.
Halo jump halfway through. You got the Paris car chases.
But I'm talking about the key stunt from the film, which I think is the Halo jump.
The Halo jump.
Yeah.
One, yeah.
And even looking back at part one, they're all stunts where the amazement from the stunt doesn't come from how crazy it is. It's from how long the shot lingers, how the scale of the stunt is presented. And as cool as it is that Tom Cruise is hanging off this plane and doing these things, I don't think a single shot lingered for more than 1 second where he was in a state of peril or danger. And that doesn't give you the scale of the stunt. Like when it pans out on him doing the Burj Khalifa or even the cliff jump where it's him going over the edge and you just kind of see the bike going and stuff like that. That's a lingering shot. You feel that stunt. You're gasping for air because it's like on the edge of the seat stuff. Like him hanging off onto the edge of the plane or him doing the halo jump. Those are things where they're one continuous shot, so it makes it seem more perilous. I didn't feel much peril from the final stunt purely because I didn't see the scale of the stunt. And they could have, I know that it's limited footage, stitching it together, make it into an action sequence, but it's the same thing as like having a big fight scene and cutting on every punch. That's what this scene did for me. So it didn't impress me even slightly. As cool of a stunt as it is, and I'm sure if I saw the behind the scenes of it, I'd be like, wow, that's stunning, amazing. But the way the film presented it didn't excite me at all, which is crazy. It's the biggest stunt of the film. It's the biggest thing. I should be excited by seeing it. But the way this franchise has set up its previous stunts as being long, lingering shots, you feel the stunt, you see the stunt. I didn't get that from this film. And that kind of left me with a little bit of a sour taste because it's like, well, that's the big sequence. That's the end. Kind of like that should be the moment. Even if they just had one part of the sequence, just one, where like you can actually see him like holding onto the edge as it's flipping or something like that, or even a lingering shot on takeoff would have been useful as like him grappling on that isn't CG'd of him like scraping across the ground and stuff like that, like him actually trying to climb up the plane, something like that, because surely they would have had some of the footage of him doing some of that as part of the stunt. That would have upped the stakes for me. Instead, I'm just sat there going, it's a cool sequence, but it's nowhere near as cool as literally all of the other ones that have been done in the previous films. It doesn't even compare because of the way it's been edited.
I venomously disagree with everything you just said. But we'll get on it. And I will say, I think you'll be on the minority of minorities with that. But it's fair to bring up because there are people that agree. Then please comment. Like, we need to find them. Probably like someone, I don't know. I was going to make a joke about someone, but I don't know anyone who's actually said they've disliked that until you. So
it's not a dislike. I still think it's an impressive stunt. It just didn't stun me in the same way that the other films did.
I thought how they shot it was the best it could ever be for doing what they did. But that's a little. Let's do that next. We're going to put the big two together. Okay, right. So we've got the story. Let's talk the story. So, following on from the Dead Reckoning Part 1, Tom Cruise has the key. The cross-face key, and he now needs to source the submarine. That was the end of Dead Reckoning Part 1. So when Dead Reckoning Part 2 opens, maybe I'm just a bit thick. I thought it was going to be quite as simple as the story for Part 2 is going to be, we just need to find the submarine to destroy the entity, which is too simple to be true. And it's Mission Impossible, not Mission Easily Possible. So how do we up the stakes on this? We have Ethan Hunt having to work under the entity to do exactly what the entity wants, whilst at the same time the entity has disowned Gabrielle, who we'll talk about characters in a bit more depth later. But Tom Cruise is now fundamentally, I think Clarice Larry's review on The Independent was he is basically the Messiah, which is the best way of doing this. But only Ethan Hunt can save the world, and no one else can, and the world will fall apart without Ethan Hunt, and it has to be on Ethan. Blah blah blah. Ethan Hunt. The story for this film does simplify to, we need to get the entity from the submarine. We do need to destroy it. But now, as the world has fell apart around us, we also need to stop the entity from taking control of all the nuclear warheads, setting them on each other, wiping out humanity, and allowing a new world order to build from that point. All whilst the president and other leaders are weighing up the decision to nuke all the other countries so they don't lose control of their own nuclear missiles. I think that is it. Very, very scarcely said.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So the stakes obviously alter. And I will say this, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, with the Mission Impossible films, you look at that first one, right? Obviously, it's the origins of a TV series. It was this drama in Prague. The team are wrongly set up and how we get to it. And as the film's gone on more and more and more, the stakes have got higher. We've ended up with nuclear missiles. We've got other things like the rabbit's foot coming into play. But could I be right in saying, because the other ones have been like, oh yeah, we could prevent the World War, Ghost Protocol. We need to stop them sending the nuke because then that would have a chain reaction. This is the first one where the world is at risk. If he does not save the day, we will wipe out humanity. And this is where it got very clunky the opening. The second viewing, I actually went along with it. I was like, now I know the outcome of the film. Now I've seen this film. It makes a little bit more sense for me. Whilst it's still somewhat shaky, how they, it's the entity saying all of it with a black screen and a bit of blue lights going around. Like, you are so focusing on anything being said. And that's them telling you have to listen because, as you said, it's all where it's being said on screen. It's not, they're telling you, not showing you, and they're not building it. And a film that's got 2 hour 50 runtime as well, they have to do this. And I'm a bit not. It's so hard to talk about because by the end of the film, it worked. And I kind of want to criticize that set, but I just can't because for me, it worked eventually. And that's where I don't think I've ever had this relationship with the film. I'm not like gloating it because it's Mission Impossible. Like the first viewing, and I don't know if this makes a bit more sense, about 45 minutes in, I was worried thinking, are we having a Rise of Skywalker? Have they just done too much for the finale? Have they gone backwards? Have they fucked something up here? That I know people hate episode 8, that's fine. Episode 8's black and white. Kylo Ren is now the head of the evil guys. Rey's the head of the good guys. There's a planetary wolf control. So fucking simple. And then they destroyed all that at the start of 9. Not episode 8, sorry. Mission Impossible 8 doesn't go down that route. By the time it gets the ending, it's stuck the landing and it's like fixed Act 1. Can you like jump in? Because I'm so confused and I need to say that's just me. That's like the story's weird.
It's a very odd story because there was a natural jump off point. And I think if they kept it as part 1 and part 2 in that natural sense, I think it would have been a lot easier to lead on. But it's almost as if like they needed this to be its very own separate film where like the stakes at the start of the film, like they could have turned around and just said, an AI called the Entity has taken over the world global nuclear power. You wouldn't even need a part 1. You could have easily just jumped in there. And for people who haven't seen part 1, I think it is still watchable weirdly because of that.
As well. I agree.
But that's only made possible because they do so much like over complication to basically get an entire film's plot into that opening sequence again to almost re-explain it. And at the same time, trying to re-explain everything that's ever happened in the entire franchise, such as reintroducing Mission Impossible 3. Mission Impossible 3 now kind of, instead of it being the weird kind of, middle child that's like, oh, there's no real connection to the rest of the franchise, it's just a decent kind of mission on its own, is now suddenly like, oh, this is actually like the most important mission technically, like because it sets up, the entity and stuff like that way back when. It just makes it very confusing, and I'm sure some people will be watching the film and going, what do you mean I have to go back and watch Mission Impossible 3? Does this mean I have to watch Mission Impossible 1 as well? Where does 2 come into it? Like, everyone knows that 4 onwards is kind of a continuation and kind of you can watch those in sequence. So it just confuses things in that sense, and I think they could have done a better way of streamlining that, or even just an easier way of just cutting out the fat from the film. It's very rare you're going to get someone willing to sit down and watch a 2 hours 59 action film. Like a 2 hours 59 film in general nowadays, like people aren't as fond as those kind of longer films anymore. And films that go longer than that, such as, say, for example, The Brutalist, are throwing in intermissions at that point. so that people, can, go and, have a toilet break or something like that, and just actually kind of reset kind of from the film and stuff like that. But like, I think the opening sequence could have been cut down for sure. It could have been a lot less complicated, a lot less. Even in the opening, they could have just done it. And sounds really kind of bad and cheesy, but I mean, they've got the "your mission if you choose to accept it" tape at the very start. Could have said, over the last few months, instead of showing clips from the previous films, he could have gone, "You've gone and released Paul Clementiff's character from prison. You're kind of assembling a team, but we don't know why. We need you for this mission," kind of thing. And that would have actually just worked. Like,
yeah, I'm with you. It's the opening act is where, again, I've got the most issues. I think most people will. And I'm still curious to hear from more people that have seen it on that, because it is going to be something I think people talk about. And, you go to those other ones and the openings are so tight, they get you going within 2 minutes. And the opening mission, it was working. And then it was when he steps into the entity, and it's just like, whoa. So he's now got to get that, to give to Gabrielle, to then take away from Gabrielle. Now he's got to add this in there and do that. And it's just...
And you've got the genie in the bottle, which can only be triggered.
Yeah.
It's just like...
And what I loved with the story, and I get this, I like the idea of, Ethan Hunt's got to do his own mission to get from the submarine to the ice. I like that the other team had to do their mission, which was to get to this remote base, get the coordinates, and come meet him there. That is perfect. That is Mission Impossible. And one criticism I saw online, which I disagree with, was, there was a lot of luck in the way. And I was just sat there like...
Have you seen any Mission Impossible film ever?
This is it. It's called Mission Impossible. Like, not I just hate some of those criticisms. You're 8 films in. It's the final one. About what you said of runtimes. I get it too. Like, you can only get away with the long runtimes for me these days on the final films. Like, I think audiences... Or, it's an Oppenheimer or something, or there's the right thing. But if it's this astronomical runtime, is it earned? And I think Mission Impossible at this point in time has earned that.
8 films into the franchise that's been going for almost 30 years. Like, it's earned it. It's
not Transformers. Like, they got longer and longer, and the films got worse and worse. And it's like, no. Like, please get back to your basics. And they started doing that with Bumblebee. Then they went the wrong way straight after. But kind of with the story, let's talk some characters, because we're going to sort of wrap up character tracks for a lot of them. We're going to start in priority order. Ethan Hunt first. We spoke a lot about Tom Cruise already, so this may be shorter. But you mentioned about Tom Cruise, right? His dedication to this role, to how he's on screen, his performance, he's not homing in. His hair's changed again, which they make a great comment about. And he's grown a lot of hair in a 2-month spell. As someone that has thick hair that grows hair quite quickly, I wish I could grow my hair that long in 2 months, because I probably would have otherwise. And his hair actually comes into it for the final act. Like, the reason his hair is longer is to literally get plain aerodynamics, which I actually respect. Ethan's arc in this is fine. As summed up by the Clarice's review, it's the Messiah. I don't have an opinion on that. I guess the discussion with the Ethan Hunt character goes, should he have died? I've seen some people say that. I'm going to be totally honest. This is really wild. I don't mind Daniel Craig's Bond dying. And I know I know I'm in a minority with that. I'm in a hell of a minority. My perspective of the Daniel Craig dying was, should the franchise continue? I mean, we know it will at last now, but the Craig era will be the only era of Bond looked at as an open and closed book. So on the premise that in the next 20 to 30 years, they continue making James Bond films, the Craig death is earned to an extent. Now, if they don't, or they keep killing Bond, different conversation. But because there's no Mission Impossible without Ethan Hunt, I'd said, I think it was to Scott from Spires before then, I might have said to you, I was like, I think we're going to get the Christian Bale Dark Knight Rises nod. Like, he is alive, but he has earned his retirement. Right? If that makes sense. Ethan Hunt more so than Batman at this point in time. So when we got the parachute flaring up, I actually thought for a second, oh my fucking God, they're going to kill Ethan Hunt. And the fact that crossed my mind is a great weight of the final act, because you get so many films where Tom Cruise will never be in peril. It doesn't matter what he's doing, he's not in peril because it's Tom Cruise or it's a lead character. Marvel films in particular, right? They own that record of knowing no one's in peril. Even when they've died, they're not in peril anymore. I thought they might kill Ethan, and I'm glad they didn't, because I think he has earned the right to survive.
I was going to say, I thought it would have been closer when Briggs basically pointed the gun at him at the end.
Yeah.
That
I was
that
like, not
that
now.
that got me more than the parachute. That was like oh, you know, all of his missions have kind of come together, and that would be an open and closed book. Save the world, well done, but you know, this is personal at this point. Like, you know, whether he was right or wrong, he killed his dad, and therefore, you know, yeah. But
Dad's John Voight, not a big loss anymore. I'm joking.
no,
Apparently, he's going to save Hollywood. He did some special broadcasts, which was hilarious. And obviously, his kids have no relationship with him. Sorry.
yeah,
By the way, we'll get Shook. I fucking love Shook. He's right. My sister's me. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, what's he from?" I'm like, none of my family's gonna know the name Shay Wingham, but he's like a great character actor that I think has He's a bit like a Ben Mendelsohn, that he doesn't have like the fun Australian rep, but like every time Shay Wingham pops up in a film, you're kind of like, okay, Shay Wingham's involved. Like I'm in. Like, I don't know what it is about him. He's got this like permanently confused face, which works so well for his character. And we'll get to him. But sorry, Ethan Hunt, happy he lived?
I'm okay with it. I'm fine with it because it's one of those kind of retirement kind of things. And to be fair, I mean, it's his franchise. He could have killed himself. I would have been, to me, it wouldn't have mattered whether he lived or died at this point. He's not James Bond. He's not an immortal person who gets the mantle passed on to him through name. It's one of those things where it's like he's gone and saved the world again, but this time sacrificing his life for it is the final reckoning. That would have made sense. That would have been fine. But at the same time, him just kind of like going back into the shadows, and then it's like, well, does he do more missions? He could if he wanted to. Does he want to? No, probably not. He might just kind of do the old go into hiding thing and stuff like that. I mean, the only thing that could have given you a bit more closure on that would have been whether he went off with Hayley Atwell at the end, or whether he, you know, got back with his wife at the end, seeing as, you know, she was kind of face dropped in the film and stuff like that. But it's one of those things where it's like, look, that ending didn't matter either way. Like I was fine with him dying. I was fine with him living in the end. So
that's fair. And you mentioned Hayley Atwell. Let's talk Grace. So one big question, specifically with Dead Reckoning Part 1, was, are they going to hand the franchise over to Hayley Atwell? I'm going to be blunt. I didn't want them to. I love Hayley Atwell.
probably not. No.
B,
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like a pass the torch. Dark Knight Rises, right, leads into a passing the torch over, which it works for the mythology of what Nolan wants for his Dark Knight. But I was worried that, are we going to get this polite handing over? Nothing against Hayley Atwell. I just think, for me, Mission Impossible is the Pirates of the Caribbean discussion, right? The franchise is Johnny Depp. Whether your thoughts on him is positive, negative, I'm neutral on that. I don't think, even though Pirates of the Caribbean dates back to, you know, there are female characters, the female Pirates film, they are at Disneyland, they were there at the beginning with him. The film franchise, to the public eye, is him. And there shouldn't be any without him. I'm the same Mission Impossible. I don't think Grace has a lot to do, but on the second viewing, when you have that recovery moment, I thought, oh, they're going to play the romance angle, and I'm so glad they didn't, because not the fact, oh, Tom Cruise in his 60s, she's like in her like late 30s, but his character doesn't need that. He isn't looking for that, and I think that's what makes their relationship work. That she's a fantastic addition to the series, and she's played her part in both films, but I don't think she has as much to do in this one. And not rudely, I don't mind that. She's got such great chemistry with the team, right? Like, she feels like Simon Pegg came into Mission Impossible in 3, and he made it his own, and they had to keep bringing him back. I think, hey, that was now. Granted, it's the final 2. She is part of that team, and I look at them as a collective with a team, and it isn't just a replacement for Rebecca Ferguson. Obviously, you know, very small role in Part 1, mainly due to filming Dune. Grace is a weird one because she has a lot more to do in the first film than this one. And I wonder if that's something they evolved as the final reckoning evolved. And as I said, the focus should have been more on Tom Cruise, because if it is the final one, it needs to be Ethan's mission. But her and Benji leading the side mission, I have a lot of fun with that. And I think they both, again, play their part with each other. Like, everyone who works in these films, they all just seem like they love each other, which is amazing, because it seems like, you know, they're all doing their own stunts. It's not just Tom Cruise. They are doing they need to learn these things to do these things. And it seems like when you're in a Mission Impossible film, you are all in. You aren't just brought in for the sake of it. Even Ving Rhames, we'll get to Luther properly momentarily, but even as he's got older and his role has reduced somewhat, and, you know, he's in that Michael Caine stage of always sitting down, they still find a way for his character to be the heartbeat, and then make it work. And he is part of that crew. But yeah, Hayley Atwell, your thoughts?
With Grace, Yeah, I agree with you. Didn't have much to do, but I do like the fact that her initial character was that she was a pickpocket. She was a thief, very fast hands, and all down to that timing. I'm glad they finally wrote that into the plot as like something that was needed at the very end. I know it became an integral part of part one with kind of switching of the hands and stuff like that, and fast hands being a key thing. But I'm glad that kind of came full circle at the end and ended up being she was the only one in the world who could do that job for the mission. Like, it just so happened to come down to the fact that her character needed to be in that place at that time, and Tom Cruise needed to get everything else going. Because at that point, it's not Tom Cruise does the mission. Tom Cruise, sure, does the mission because of the stunt on the plane and stuff like that. They could still completely fail if Grace's character isn't there at the right time and does the right thing. She becomes almost the most important character in that moment. So I liked that. I really enjoyed the fact that, like, she wasn't just kind of a character at the side who, you know, needs rescuing or anything like that. She actually had capabilities and was kind of integral to the part of the team. Like, everyone in the end was integral to the team to complete the mission. Not a single person was not needed. I enjoyed that. Like, and that makes the character, you know, more memorable. That makes the character, you know, not just kind of another, oh, they're in the film for this part and stuff like that. So, yeah, and I guess that goes for most of the other members of the team. Like, towards the end, all of them kind of had their moment and had their thing which they needed to do for the mission to be completed, or at least for people to survive. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and with Benji as well, we'll get to Luther properly because he's the sort of last of the OGs, but Benji's in that same role. I did think for a moment, oh, could they actually kill him off? I'm glad they didn't, and I just love seeing Simon Pegg with these. Like, obviously, in Britain, right, it's the Cornetto trilogy. It was Shaun the Dead, that Space, and Shaun the Dead. That's what really pushed him on to that next level of comedy. Whereas in the States, it was getting a Mission Impossible 3. That was his Hollywood introduction, and he stuck around with those, and he's had a humongous career everywhere thanks to these ones in particular. And certainly just seeing them on the press all together. And whilst Benji, still plays that IT role well, seeing him more on the ground, working with the others, I've got nothing to add on him. Don't do the same if we want to talk Luther, who I think is a proper worthy of conversation. That, the opening act we lose Luther, who is not the IT guy. Ving Rhames has been part of it's weird because I watched the animated Lilo & Stitch for the first time last week. And I was like, oh my god, Ving Rhames is in this? Didn't know that. But him in Mission 8, I was very shocked they killed him off. And I'm going to say something sort of psychotic. The second viewing, I was a bit emotional the first. I didn't cry, but I was like, oh wow, like they went there. It's the last film because they just killed, like in No Time to Die when they killed poor Jeffrey Wright. And you're like, oh yeah, we're in the last one now. That was the Ving Rhames one. And whilst I sat on it and thought about it, today's viewing, it cemented it for me because what on the first viewing, but the second viewing has hit you properly where it is, only Luther can make a second of the I'm going to call it the antidote to the.
He had to die,
TNT. Pretty
much, yeah.
And this is where it kind of goes to me that he had to die, and only Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt, can be the guy that gets the. As he says, we're both on the right side of this door, and it's such a beautiful scene because we kind of know he's going to go, but there's no big heroic. This is my moment. He keeps calling him his brother. They just have like a final conversation that feels like a normal conversation, and we get a lovely monologue at the end, which I loved. I love you forget about it, comes back and plays, and he's worked with him on these films for almost 3 decades. Ving Rhames doesn't do as much to the press, completely understandable too. The very peculiar thing was seeing him like ill at the start of the film, and that makes me think again, was there like a subplot that would have been at the opening they took us out from? He wasn't ill in Dead Reckoning, so 2 months later he's like in a medical bed with a nurse.
Yeah, I found that a little bit confusing. Like that was
what makes me think of like not reshoots, but it kept filming this film. But his death, it's a really powerful moment, and I think where that moves Ethan's character, it's not fridging by any means, but as you said, like he needed to be done this because if he was around, he can go build the second one to outright, and I think it works for the story, and I think it's a great way for Ving Rhames to go that he does defuse a bomb that would have wiped out London, which is pretty big in the opening act. And I think where people may forget about this or lose this is because the opening act is so incredibly jarring and so much going on. He's sort of forgotten about. until the very, very end. And that I don't like, but I think Ving Rhames, bowing out of the series, it makes sense. If you were going to kill someone off in a non-horror way, it would have needed to be him or Simon Pegg. And I think it was the right call with it being Luther, that you are going back to that first film, how long they've known each other.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. And he's been a fantastic actor as part of the franchise for all the films. He is always entertaining when he's on screen, always definitely a presence, and always there by, Ethan's side throughout every single film. I'm going to go ahead and say that, and this is going back onto the trailer kind of talk, I knew from the trailer he was going to die. Just the fact that it was his voice doing the speech, I have no regrets. It was like, well, he's dead then. Like that was straight in my head. I was like, well, yeah, of course he's going to die. Like if he's making a speech about having no regrets, there's going to be some point in the film where he will bow out and he will die. Especially as I was like, well, if this is the last film, then they're probably going to kill off at least one character that we care about. I mean, they did it in the last film anyway with Rebecca Ferguson's character. Yeah. So at the same time, it was like, well, it's Luther making the speech in the trailer. He's probably kicking the bucket. It's probably going to be either Act 1 or kind of end of Act 2 kind of thing. I was right. Like my prediction came true. Still an impactful death. Still like, as soon as like, that whole misdirection with Gabriel and stuff like that, I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's Luther gone kind of like, but at least they can have that final conversation as a casual conversation. And once again, like the three, I guess, speeches he makes in this film were all fantastic, whether it was the kind of conversation before death, the having no regrets, or the final tape recording. They're all brilliant. So even if he's dead for most of the film, he still has a massive impact on the story, and he's still present.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk. It's not like it's a checklist, because it's the final film. I sort of want to give everyone their moment. We'll round out the main team. We're going to get to the couple, which was probably a big conversation itself. Pom Klementieff playing the role of Paris, returning villain turned ally. I love Pom as an actress. I think she's very underrated in the Marvel films because she's the weird one. She came in Guardian. She's a bit like the Lando Calrissian. Like she came in the second one, so while she's not the OG Guardian, they did make the effort to make her feel like one by the end. I love that she's sort of not found her roots in action. So Pom's background, do you know what one of her biggest hobbies is? Skydiving. So if that's your big hobby, yeah, you end up in Mission Impossible very well. And she's very close to Tom Cruise now. Apparently they go skydiving together. That's so on point for Tom Cruise. Like, I found a friend, what did you both do? Skydiving. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, again, not as much to do narrative-wise, get some good humor moments, but again, and this is where it amazes me and feels like Endgame, right? You've got all these new characters, i.e. they're introduced a film ago. They're part of the team, but it feels like they're part of that team properly. And if it's the last film, no one's begging for sequels with them. And it's that whole Marvel discussion, right? If Avengers ended with Endgame, oh, but we wouldn't have had this, we wouldn't have had that. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but the Avengers ended with Endgame. And it's like these characters are that should there be another film, you'd be like, yeah, the team is Benji, it's Grace, it's Paris, but they don't need another film. And the additions to these in particular, which is a big discussion point, is the return of William Donlow, something that was announced a very long time ago online, officially announced. It wasn't like a leak that we've got an actor back on set. We've got some like hidden cameos coming in for the finale. They bring back Donlow, and if people are unfamiliar, obviously he's in the film, played by Rob Saxon. He is the guy in Mission Impossible 1 that gets given the laxatives for Tom Cruise to do the break-in. Now, when I saw he was coming back and you see him in the shack, and I was like, oh, we're going to get like a 2-minute scene, and it's the very typical nod to the head. Him and his wife became part of the team in a very important role. And to me personally, gave me the most emotional scene in the film, which is when they're on the plane and he talks about, you think you owe me a life, but if you hadn't done what you did, I don't get my wife, I don't get my home. You have given me the life I wanted. It's a really important role. And I thought he was great. And I think this is where I felt like Endgame, not like, oh, this returning character came back. It was tying it back to its very roots of 30 years ago. It isn't this, Star Wars would call it glup shitto, where it's like background characters funny. This is more of a, we brought back Kittredge in Dead Reckoning, which was a great little, bring back. And in this one, it's bringing back a very innocent character to have an integral role. He gets them the coordinates. He sends the Russians to the wrong place. He ensures that they have the right ones, that he does it right. He's very important to this. And I love that he's
defuses the bomb at the end as well. Like, he does a lot.
He is able to save their lives as well. Greg Tarzan Davies in this as well, one of the Top Gun boys, another one that Tom Cruise has carried over. But he's got such an important role. What did you think? Did you think he'd been it long? Like, what was your whole...
I mean, I completely didn't follow the fact that he was going to be in the film to start off with. It has been a long... I mean, since we did the retrospective, it's been since I've seen Mission Impossible 1. So it's been a little while, at least, for such a background minor character, shall we say, that's kind of a non-important character, to come back and be a very important character and not just be on screen for a little bit. I was like, wow, that's fantastic. I really enjoyed kind of his character being reintroduced and stuff like that. And I know you were talking about Pom Klementif. I'm really confused. Another character who's kind of almost cut from the film entirely, who had an integral part in part 1 but wasn't in part 2. Where was Vanessa Kirby? Like,
well, I guess her and her brother's story is done, right? Like, I'd hope so, at least. I mean, we know where she is. She was filming Fantastic Four.
Well, yeah, we know that, but at the same time, it's like it's one of those questions of like, you have such a key character in part 1 who just kind of gets completely dropped for part 2.
I just think her story was done, because the whole thing of them on the train was obviously getting the new identities via Kitchett, wasn't it? So, kind of with you. If she'd have come back, it would have been nice, but I don't know if they needed her. We did get some other attack. I mean, I've not got anything to add on Greg Tarzan Davis as Theo. Again, what I will say on a side note, is someone that loves Top Gun Maverick and recently put it in the top 4 films of all time for favourite. We're 3 years on from Top Gun Maverick now. That cast, I'm sorry, we'll be looking at that cast in 10 years as like the action equivalent of fucking Skins at this rate, because
it will be.
Glenn Powell is everywhere. I've forgotten her name. Barbara, I forgot the surname. She was nominated for the Oscar this year for the Bob Dylan film. Marissa Barbaro. I think it's Marissa Barbaro. Greg Tarzan Davies rocking up Mission Impossible films. We've had Manny Jacinto popping up in The Acolyte and Star Wars. All the Mission Impossible cast are moving on to amazing things. Even Charles Pennell coming back in this is amazing. But to see him again, like, they're not like Tom Cruise's disciples, but there was a photo of them all at the red carpet together, and some of the other actors came to London just to go to the red carpet to be with them all. I think it's really cool. And again, whilst he doesn't have a lot to do, he's earned his place in part of the team, and we know the team's important to Tom Cruise and these. I'll be totally blunt. I don't have much to add on other technically not light-sided characters, but I've got no opinion to say on all the CIA folk. I know we've obviously got Angela Bassett as the president. Great to see her back. I loved the idea, as despicable as it sounds, of them nuking Washington and killing her son to show the weight of what could go wrong. I've just got a very new... I like the political side of it. I like political stuff in films. I liked seeing the discussions of what is it like morally to kill 100 million to save 7 billion. I don't have much opinions on the group. I think it's a pretty stacked cast as an understatement. You know,
I think it was more of a kind of call in all the friends and see who says yes to it, kind of like...
Nick Offerman, as soon as he came in at my sister, is that Ron Swanson? I'm like, yeah, like Ron Swanson's in this, and you know, it's
you got
even the
Holt McCallany, you've got Mark Gatiss in there.
And it's such a random one. Like, if people, I know a lot of them obviously are British because they film it here, which is a big part of why some of them, the British, not bring that. But I'm going to give a really quick shout out to 2 others. Now, I've not watched Severance yet, and this character had the most laughs in both screenings.
Yes,
Captain Bledsoe, played by Tramell Tillman. I've wanted to watch Severance. I've not seen it. Loved the Navy crew in the submarine. Katie O'Brien as well, who I think is starting to really get into these big blockbuster films. Wish we could have got more of her, but I think that's the sort of person that they could only get her in for one role, and they clearly wanted to get her on screen. And it's great to see someone from Mandalorian like moving more into Hollywood, doing dramas. She did the film with Kristen Stewart last year. I forgot the name of that one. Love Lies Bleeding, maybe?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. I do have a question on one character. Why was Hannah Waddingham in it, and why did she have an American accent? Like,
because they'd seen Ted Lasso and like, let's find a way to get Hannah Waddingham in this. American general, okay. I'm the same as you, mate. She's in like. Also, the context of May 22nd, 1996. I was meant to Google it in the car, but I didn't because I was following all the other stuff. I'm assuming that was someone in the original team in Prague that died that she was close to. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but they just make a very backhanded comment like, we both lost someone special that day. But again, it's like Mission Impossible lore is a thing, which is wild because they never ever refer to the previous films, the first 6. And the 7, 8 was just like everything's come together in a big fancy knot. Same as you. Should we move on from heroes and talk villains before we get to the big stunts? Okay. The Entity. Can't say it as well as Carrie Hughes. I've got no opinion on this. I spoke about it as part of the story. My opinion.
Bigger villain in part 1. It was a bigger villain in part 1.
My conversation turns to Gabrielle, played by Essie Morales. I have some thoughts on this. I don't dislike the character. One of the very few things that I have sort of nagging in my head as a criticism is not that I need everything in life explained to me, black and white. They made a very key part of part 1, setting up the fact that they had a history together and that he was responsible for the death of somebody that Tom Cruise was essentially framed for and then disappeared. I felt like we were missing, not a backstory, I just felt like we were missing character depth for me to care for this to be the bad guy of the final film. Because as you said, right, the Entity is somewhat stripped down. In the first film, it's the active villain. It's controlling what goes on. In the second film, it's a MacGuffin for the story. And the real truth is to get Gabrielle, which I love the sequences he's involved in. As got a very charismatic performance. But I just wish there was a bit more on their prior relationship. Because when I look at this as the finale, I do sit there thinking Solomon Lane would have been a better villain for the finale. But I get you can't put him in 4 films in a row, and the actor wouldn't be doing 4 films in a row. So I just feel like I'm missing something with the villain to tie it together. What do you think?
I think what we're missing is the context of, the first kill, I guess, technically. The reason why Ethan joined was never fully explained, and it's kind of a hanger that we're just left there, because it would have made more sense if he was a personal villain in the end, instead of being, well, he's part of the Entity and he's kind of there, but also he's, now in charge, or at least the key component. I guess you could say kind of the first film, Ethan's being hunted. The second film, Ethan's kind of hunting him. But at the same time, it's one of those where it's like, we needed that personal edge. We need that explained. And that would have been a better cold open if it was like, actually finding out what happened on that night, and that really tying into the plot here, and is the reason why kind of Gabriel is very against Ethan, the reason why Ethan is very against Gabriel, making it more of a personal battle would have made more sense. Instead, it just became a bit of a confusing, the villains really lacked in this film. Yeah. Really. The few times where Ethan gets attacked, or various different people in the plot gets attacked, whether it's the assassination attempt on the president or whatever, is because the Entity made me do it. But the Entity's got no threat anymore. The Entity has the threat of kind of world annihilation, but at the same time, it's kind of neutered because it won't annihilate the world if it's not going to completely win, if it doesn't have complete control. So it just feels like in part 1, the stakes were really high. In part 2, the stakes were a little bit lower, even though they're ramping up to the world's going to end. It somehow feels like it's drawn back slightly. And I think it was missing some kind of, GoldenEye edge. It needed to be a bit more like GoldenEye. It needed to have that kind of personal relationship going on there, or that kind of, why we dislike each other, kind of why I've got to do this thing kind of relationship.
I'm the same, especially in part 1 when the Entity hired him because it's the one guy that had done something to Ethan. I felt we were really lacking on that, and I don't need to know the background to Ethan. I don't need to know why he joined the IMF. But when they make it a conscious story point that we're going to obviously not explain, but when they make it a conscious point, we're going to have an actor. We're going to not de-age them, thankfully. We're going to have these actors looking like younger versions of themselves. Someone has been killed that we don't know about, which is fine. But if you're going to show it and now raise it as a part of the character, I felt like there should have been something there. And maybe they filmed it, maybe it didn't work. I don't know, but it's a hangover from a part 1 into part 2, isn't it? When it doesn't become as fluent, and they're rewriting part 2 and they're filming it and there's delays and there's so many other things. The film's clearly evolved a lot since Dead Reckoning part 1, and it's just something because I'm the same. I don't. Gabrielle to me isn't the big bad, and Mission Impossible bar. their track record of big bads, it's not a Bond. Their intention isn't we have this wild, cool big bad like that's part of it. And now we can obviously say Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think undoubtedly everyone would say is by country mile the best villain they've had. Probably in the fact that it was a very well written character with one of the best performances. And JJ is very good at doing villains, but the other films haven't had that, and it just felt like I think because we had the great, Solomon Lane before, we had like either he's not well depth. The logic was he's basically like your level of ability was a British spy, and now he's turned and found his own like people. That was a threat, and I just think there was just something missing about him. But I will say, and we spoke before we went live, we have had an all-timer villain death in this film. We don't get them often anymore, and it's pretty brutal for 12A. The over the top villain death, a death that whilst the character might not live long in the memory, his death will, which maybe then raises the character. But to say, I've got in the parachute brackets, he didn't go to have his dramatic villain escape plan, like he did in the first one, jumping off the train, immediately getting his head split in half on the back of the upside down propeller. Peak cinemas, the overused term these days. Like, it was so funny.
It was laugh out loud funny, like both screenings.
Yeah, today it was I was like, thankfully I'm not a sicko. It isn't just the film people being sick. I was like, it's hilarious, and it's pointless because obviously Tom Cruise did have the parachute anyway. But I loved how he went out, and even that I won't get to the sequence, but even when like he's laughing and shouting at Ethan, and because they're playing real life audio, you can't hear it because they're on a plane doing that. Obviously, they had to add in the line about the parachute. I get that. You need that as an audience, but a great villain death, but a bit underwhelming as a villain is how I'm going to go with that. And I guess where that will segue us before we get to the big moment, I want to talk the score. So, Lorne Balfe was announced last month that he would not be composing Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. The composer of Mission Impossible Fallout, Dead Reckoning Part 1, announced for Part 2, and he was replaced by Max Arouge and Alfie Godfrey, if that's how you pronounce Max's surname. Very, not concerning. I thought the score's fine. I thought the score's very good. Like a lot of the Mission Impossible scores, I think the soundtracks are underrated. I don't say it because I collect them on vinyl, but I'm a big fan of these scores, and I think they've done a lot more from, not to compare it to Bond and 30. You know how like the theme is bigger than the film for Mission Impossible, and the same with Bond, you could argue. Obviously, Bond brings in an actual musician to do a specific theme for their film every time, but the Bond films, whilst there's been fantastic composers throughout, sometimes I feel like they're lacking in their soundtracks, and that's maybe a minority as a Bond fan. I think when Zimmer was brought in, it just completely elevated to another level because they hadn't had that A-list basically composer, not A-lister, an all-timer, a John Williams level. And for Mission Impossible, Lorne Balfe, who's really made his name with these films, working on these, he's a great composer. He's done so many work at the moment. He's regarded as like the next Hans Zimmer. He's one of Hans Zimmer's proteges. For him to be gone a month ago and essentially his understudies take over was just very peculiar. There aren't official reasons as to why. Not to compare it for family things, but Nicholas Britell departed Andor for season 2. It was announced that that was due to a personal issue with his family, and that he'd been able to contribute so much, but not all, so would share credits. Oh God, I've forgotten the composer who took over, to Chris Robertson. Very good score for Andor season 2, anyway. There's nothing about the Lorne Balfe stuff, so I did like these guys. They've worked with Tom Cruise before. They did a bit of music, I believe, on Fallout. They did a little bit of music, credited music on Fallout, Dead Reckoning Part 1, and Top Gun Maverick. So they've clearly worked with Cruise and Paramount before. The score's fine for me. I'll add anyone that collects them. The Mutant vinyls now for pre-order. They announced that yesterday. The plane sequences, the front cover, it looks amazing. But do you have any thoughts on the score before we get to the big stunts? I
mean, at this point, the score wasn't really noticeable for any major differences from Part 1. Not to say it was copy and paste. There were subtle differences. You can tell that. But at the same time, I didn't know anything about the drama of kind of like who was composing or anything like that. So that's very interesting. And that's very, it's very interesting how lots of people are kind of abandoning shit from the franchise, kind of in various different ways. Maybe this is kind of the end purely on the fact that no one wants to come back and do it from any side of it. People who have previously worked in the film. But No, I wouldn't say any discernible, ridiculous, like crazy differences or anything like that. The music came to life during the plane sequence, I will say, just because you don't have the audio because it is, live audio on set. You don't really have. You can see Gabriel saying something, but it's like all you can hear is the score on the plane. So it's like yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Okay, let's get to the big moments. Stunts. We always put these last before we get to favourite scenes and final thoughts. Right, let's just call it Act 2.
Yeah.
The mission as such, Tom Cruise needs to get the coordinates of the Sevastopol. He will be put on the submarine, which they have to broadcast for 10 minutes every 2 hours to get the coordinates from Simon Pegg and Co. I love that as a threat because it set up 2 story arcs intertwining with one another.
And
which
they have
made
to
it
get the
very
timing
tense.
right as well, otherwise Tom Cruise dies straight away.
Yeah. So I loved the setup. And this is where I move into the film starts earning from where I struggled at the start. When you get to the submarine sequence, I'm sorry. Firstly, I'm going to praise both screens have been in complete silence following the atmosphere of what this sequence is. This one in particular, to have not been featured in any of the marketing. I know there are photos of Tom Cruise like in the submarine, as in like not hanging on the side, but like he's in the submarine for a normal still that you wouldn't question. To make sure no visuals are released of him in the water or him with a submarine in vision. The cinematography in these sequences, like having, ships diving up as this tiny little bodies like flicking. It's like a bloody Pixar thing. Like sort of anime. It's something you can only dream of in animation, and they're doing this. We do not know at this point in time, and this is questions I have, which is a praise. Submarines were involved in real life, and this will go for that budget conversation earlier. We don't know the context of submarines being used in real life yet, because they haven't over-marketed the stunt. There is nothing out there compared to the biplanes. And I love it, and I can't wait to find out more about it. My uncle's in the Navy. That's always a weird thing to tell people. And he's in the subs that just came up after like 7-8 months. So he loves films that do submarine things because it's his job. So I'm kind of waiting for him to see it, to have a chat. But knowing that real-life submarines were used, because I don't think Tom Cruise was flying off a real submarine. But then I am sat there thinking, could there have been a parked submarine that Tom Cruise jumped out of and swam alongside? Like, obviously not the rolling of. I'm like the very beginning, before we even get to the Sevastopol, the giant Russian one behind. But the moment those doors opened, and when he twists, I don't know if you noticed it on the second screening, because the press screenings at the Leicester Square IMAX, which is the second biggest IMAX in the country, I think. And it's so big, sometimes you have to look around to get everything. When he's twisting the nozzle, that's the IMAX ratios coming up. I love shit like that.
Didn't notice that. Notice
it's like,
that.
The Hunger Games, when she comes up, and as she comes up, it goes, twisting the rig. They're like, it's so cool. I didn't notice it in London, but I noticed it in my local IMAX because obviously it's not as big as that one. But this is where I live for the cinema, is these sorts of things. No other actors doing this. The tension on that first viewing, even though we know it's Mission Impossible, and this is where the part one gets enhanced a little bit. When he gets to I'm going to call it Cerebro to get the entity, what you've witnessed for 10-15 minutes of pure silence in the auditorium, atmospheric music that isn't the Mission Impossible theme, a really haunting thing. And in the best Mission Impossible circumstances, it all keeps going wrong, which is when it's better for Mission Impossible, which always adds to it. I think Ghost Protocol is the best one because the whole logic of the film was everything will go wrong. And that was the key, and it worked. But this 20-minute sequence is some of the most gripping cinema I've ever seen in my life. And I think we'll talk about the air later with the planes, and I spoke about a lot already, but to have the lowest depths, it's someone that's scared to see me, to have this there, and to have this sequence, and it's your middle act sequence, is just mental. And taking off the stuff to go through the second viewing, I was just watching people and listening to gasps and noises because it was just so tense. And this is what I live for. This is why I think this series is almost unparalleled with action, modern action, not spy, as action sequences go, because you're just not going to get this with anything else.
What I like is the fact that you get so much build up towards this scene, and then when you get to the scene, it's dead silence. You get so much talk and so much talk and so much talk, and then it just comes in and hits you. And my first initial instinct was, I kind of wish they had Benji on the comms in this scene, kind of talking through it, and Tom Cruise going through that and having that banter like they did in, was it in Rogue Nation, the one with the other water scene? Yeah, and have a similar scene like that. But actually, this works better. And kind of, I've come away from that thinking, especially on the second viewing. I really enjoyed the sequence more on the second viewing. Because I think I appreciated the silence more. I appreciated the tension more. I appreciated kind of, the various different stunt work that would have been needed with kind of in and out of water, the rotating set and everything like that. That all feels very practical. And I'm sure like they would have done it in a very similar way to things that were done in Inception and stuff like that. But this is almost more impressive to the fact of like, you've got water involved as well. It's definitely Tom Cruise doing these stunts as well. It feels a lot more kind of lived in and a lot more kind of like real, if that makes sense. Instead of it being like the dreamlike sequence in Inception, you've got this sequence which is like, sloshing the water in a glass and kind of trying to stay kind of afloat kind of thing. But I think what makes the tension even better is realistically, this is the end of his first mission. This is the end of the Dead Reckoning mission right here. Like him taking the codes back was the original mission. The mission has changed obviously from the start of this film, but it's the fact that it's taken all this time to complete his original mission, and that's the end of it. That is the moment. So I've always appreciated I now appreciate that scene more because that is like a finale in itself. You've got two finales. That's the finale to the first film right there. And then realistically, you've got the finale to the second film coming out later as like I've done the original mission. The mission got more complicated. This is what I've got to do now kind of thing on top of that. But that's all made by Tom Cruise and the direction team and everything behind that, kind of making this scene, this stunt kind of work well.
And the rotating, I mean, obviously we know they haven't got a real submarine on the beds rotating, but have you seen the behind the scenes of Inception? And they've got is this like an Inception level? Like there's a bowl of water with Tom Cruise in it being rotated? I don't know, but when the cameras were switching in the angles, it just added so much to it, and I loved it as a sequence. The water dripping into different levels to create different, water sockets to bring the weight down.
I mean, like technology has changed over the years from films. I mean, Inception was over 10 years ago now. I remember being on set for Masters of the Air, and they built an entire rig around a Spitfire to be able to pretty much go in every single direction, including upside down, so they could rig cameras to it. That's the kind of level of filmmaking we're dealing with. But the people who are pushing those boundaries are people like Spielberg and the team behind that, of course, looking to kind of pitch that and stuff like that. And people like, Macquarie and Tom Cruise, who are crazy enough to come up with the idea for the stunt and then go, hey, what would be cool is if we did, instead of me just going into the submarine, getting the key and getting out, let's make it as dangerous as possible. How would it be dangerous? Well, teetering on edge. Let's have it rotating. Like that kind of thing. So that's just ingenious and inventive. And I've already kind of made my points clear on the second stunt of the film. This, for me, I think is my favorite stunt from the film out of the two of them, purely because of that. I felt more tension from this scene than I did from the following scene.
I get that. It's incredible to get these in the same bloody film. That's what's remarkable. And probably like an hour apart from each other. But as you said, it is like the ending to Dead Reckoning Part 1. Like this was the original mission complete. Yeah, it's so good. I think anyone that ever watches this film, that it'll be like a scene that you just remember for like the rest of your life. And it's really dramatic to say. And you can say about a lot of Mission Impossible films. He's climbing the one where he climbed off the Burj Khalifa, the one where the one with that. This is like the one with the planes and the one with the submarines. And I think because they didn't market this, it makes the scene even better because you do not know, not what to expect. Because it's underwater, it couldn't get leaked online like when they were filming the planes. Like the train going off the side of the dam or Tom Cruise jumping off. All the stuff leaks. People, locals with cameras that are at the bottom of these mountains that no one can ever see. But when they eventually do some featurettes on this, I'm just so intrigued because, and this is what I want from them. I want to come out of the cinema knowing how did they do that? Because it doesn't happen enough these days. And it's not me kicking off at CGI. It's not me moaning about Hollywood. But what I'll say off your point, you mentioned Spielberg there. There are so few names left that will have the power to go to a studio and say, I want to do a submarine sequence. Now, I don't think Spielberg would get a submarine. I don't think anyone but Tom Cruise and Nolan would get a submarine sequence right now in the year 2025. But where I'm worried for the industry is who in the next 10 years is there going to be who can start doing these outlandish requests, because the current studio system is obviously a different conversation, but the current studio systems are at the weakest they've been in decades. The people running the studios, they are not film producers. Even in the old studio systems from the 50s, the 40s, when the treatment was bad, when they were pumping out films, they were ran by film producers. Now all the studios are ran by suits. Their backgrounds are in finance and metrics and data. They are not in the making films, which is Warner Brothers, David Zaslav being the biggest example of that. I'm incredibly concerned for the industry that because the studio names are bigger than the people that work on them, we're going to start losing that who can do this. I'm not saying stars can't be made. Like, there's cases to be made for a lot of others down the line. There are certain actors that can get away with it. You know, Nolan, obviously, as a director, can get away with it. But I'd like there to be more. And I think in the coming years, we will start to get that more. I'm not just picking Glenn Powell as one of Tom Cruise's, entourages, but Glenn Powell seems like a pretty big, Tom Holland is hitting a point. Granted, it's more Spider-Man than Tom Holland, but Tom Holland can get away with telling Sony, you're going to make this film later than I am. Like, Timothée Chalamet is a star performer, but is he a box office draw at this point in time?
I see him more of like a kind of Leo figure. He's more geared towards kind of the awards than the actual kind of star power that comes with it.
This is what we miss. Like, I don't think Timothée Chalamet can go to Warner Brothers and say, give me like $100 million to do this. No. I don't think any actor can bar Tom Cruise. I don't think Tom Hanks can do that anymore when he could have back in the day. Different conversation, but this is what made me think watching this, is that we're not going to get these without these people involved, and to have the Tom Cruise as a producer working with the director as well and the writing, the editing team, that actually sequence was just quite something. And if we segue into Act 3, I know you spoke about the planes. Before we get to the planes, I want your thoughts on the doomsday scenario. We've got the bomb from the opening of the film.
Yeah.
As the greatest Mission Possible is, the mission goes south because Kittredge just turned up with Shea Wingham, and the plan goes wrong. The plan to give Gabrielle the thing to then instantly take it from him. It all goes pear-shaped, which is what Mission Possible films do, which leads us to a scenario where we've got a ground team stopping the bomb going off alongside a second ground team who were involved for the switcheroo on the genie in the bottle, as we'll call it. Your thoughts on that going on at the same time with...
I mean, there's a lot going on here. I mean, you've also got Benji injured, and you've got like the timings of the things. You've got 3 people on the bomb. It's a lot going on. You've got the language barrier between kind of Pom Clemence's character. There's so much going on. It's a chaotic finale. It's kind of what you'd expect from these films at this point. I'm not going into a Mission Impossible film going, I want a straightforward finale. You just know it's not going to be that way. It's called Mission Impossible. The stakes kind of have to be made ridiculous at the end, even if the stakes have already been made ridiculous up until that point already. And it's all going to be pulled off with like perfect timing and perfect kind of scenarios and stuff like that. And like you said, like luck gets involved. Yeah, sure. Luck gets involved in all of these films. And situations and circumstances have to come forwards and do their own thing in the end. So I was fine with the setup for the finale. I kind of, the only line that did get me was, aha, I have a spare plane as well, just in case. It was like, yeah, come on.
Yeah. I mean, even the car action bit in that, like when he's in the car when it crashes, even that's like fucking wild. But I like what it did. I liked having, thinking Benji could actually die, and it isn't going to be him doing the IT stuff for a change. They're going to give that to Grace to do. And
sorry, very quickly, did they have the car crash literally just so they could have the scene of him running? Otherwise, there would be no reason for him to run.
They did it running at the start, but it was by the door. Like on the second thing, I was like, oh wait, like he's surely not going to run to an airfield. When he gets out of the car, you can see the sunlight. I was like, so he literally crashed at the entrance, which is was the logic like I just want to crash a car in a quarry?
Or was it literally just, we need a scene of you running, but why does he need to be running? Well, he's crashed the car, he can't get the car back up, so he has to run instead, kind of thing. That's the kind of logic that I had from that scene.
I get that. I love the fact he missed the fast plane. Now let's go to the plane sequence. I know you've given your thoughts, but I'm gonna so obviously I'm not gonna just argue like children of rattles.
No.
I think the plane sequence. So this is not the fear from part 1, right? We spoke about being over-marketed sequences in part 1. Now, the posters are the plane. the trailers have had the plane in it to an extent, but very much the end or the start, like very briefly. The IMAX adverts have all been the plane because it's the whole of you come. And in IMAX, you get a much like when they do the screen widening thing. So I'm all for marketing the big moments such as this because again they're choosing to hide the submarine, so you focus on the plane, but they're not over marketing the plane. Very, very small doses, and I think that's a key thing. They handle that well. So I'm in the complete opposite to you. I think these sequences are remarkable. Now, agree to an extent with some of it. When he's on the red plane to begin with, we get so many like just incredible shots of just these two old school planes from the 40s. I'm guessing 40s, like biplanes, just cruising around, no pun intended, cruising around South Africa. Like how they would have filmed that, because I've seen articles that spoke about like the modern helicopters and what they shoot these things on are quicker than the old planes. So there's so much that goes into even bringing it on screen. And I've got a comment by Carl who put, I work in health and safety, my job, and I can't even imagine the amount of planning that goes into the stunts and fair play to crews for constantly pushing the boundaries. And this is kind of it. Like, this is why I'm so happy they're bringing the stunt category into the Oscars. I think it's 2027. That's going to come in for the anniversary. There is so much to it because it's health and safety involved. It's stunt performers involved. There are scientists who work on the stunts and the construction of the stunts and the mechanics and what do we... You go to the Live and Let Die with the red car that does the corkscrew spin. Yeah. That was the first ever stunt to use computer.
Was that no? That's
was it earlier?
Man with the Golden Gun.
Man with the Golden Gun, correct?
Yeah. Live and Let Die is the boat over the river.
Boat. Yeah, you're right. Corkscrew is Man with the Golden Gun. So the corkscrew, that was the first ever stunt. They had a computer program how they should build the ramp to do it. And there's this behind the scenes where you can look at all the people and they're like, a computer this, and you can tell there's a bit of nervousness, like, oh, we're going to let that dictate. But they did exactly what it scientifically worked out at, and that's how that stunt worked. And there's so much that go into these. The biplane. So first of all, the whole logic of going analog because of the entity. Loved that. Didn't even think of that, if I'm honest, until it happened. Then I'm going to jump back to what I said earlier, right? Some of the best stunts of the series have not been... Tom Cruise hanging off the side of the plane. One of the best stunts ever in Mission Impossible. We all remember when that news came, like Tom Cruise hanging off the side of a plane. Yes, this is real. And it's the opening scene of Rogue Nation, I think. And I remember at the time being a bit gutted it was the opening scene. But also at the same time, it wasn't a problem because that film's just fucking outstanding by itself anyway. But with this one, it's the plane sequences are going to play a pivotal role in the film. And I think that, like the submarine thing, right? The submarine played a pivotal role in the film. The Burj Khalifa played a pivotal role in the film, but there may be others where they have them at different times. The biplanes for me were like just maximizing, no IMAX pun or anything like that. It was about maximizing that on the big screen. And there were a lot of cuts, as you said, and I get that. And I think where I disagree with it was, I felt we got to see so much of the action the way it was framed, like especially what they call loop-de-loops when they were coming back on themselves. And I think obviously we don't have the full access right to the footage that Eddie Hamilton would have, that Chris McQuarrie would have, and obviously there'd have been like limited days, there would have been so many things going on. It's not excusing it, but I think I was able to follow everything that was going on. But the only thing I didn't follow was when Gabriel can't do a loop-de-loop anymore. Now, I know that he's looking at a propeller and he gets there, but I don't know the plane science to know. You hanging on to that, how does that stop him doing something?
I think it stopped the rudders, which change, airflexion and stuff like that.
That's good. That makes sense now.
See,
so I was
able to follow that. Yeah, my biggest critique of it is that we got the lovely shots of the planes going through, through the valley and Tom Cruise on the side and that stuff like that, but we didn't get any kind of wider or longer take shot of any of the major stunts where it went upside down or him hanging off or anything like that. It was very fast cutting. And that felt like that whole thing of like, punch and then cut on the punch instead of actually seeing the action sequences. It's why I prefer films like The Raid to, modern day action blockbusters where they just cut away.
I just don't think that's possible for planes in a nice way. Like
I'm sure they have. I mean, they have the footage.
But like, if you're showing someone get punched in the face on a plane, You don't want
No,
a camera
I'm not.
from
I'm
the
not talking
side.
about like the cutaway things. What I'm talking about is it felt like that because just when you're like, oh my god, we're going to see a full wide shot sequence of Tom Cruise on the side, you already know it's him because they've already said it's him. Similar to the plane stunt from Rogue Nation, where it's not a close. You can see pretty much
There's one shot that it sits on.
Exactly.
And I think this is it as well, because that's the only shot they could have on Rogue Nation, right? They could only put the one camera in the place for it to work. Whereas with this, they obviously did it so many times. I know we'll disagree, which is fine, but I think for me, I felt like the stakes were there for the first time because of what's happening on the ground. Not for the first time, that's silly, but
I get what you mean.
Yeah, like it's not. It sounds like I'm dissing on Rogue Nation. I'm not, because Rogue Nation's so fucking good. But I'm with you. Like seeing everything. When he first emerges, when he hangs onto the red one, we see the plane taking off. We see the whole thing of him getting onto that level, and we're able to have that time to take it in. I think where it then moves into is it gets more intense and there is more cameras and you're getting closer and closer to the cockpit with those characters. I think that's why it worked for me. And I think obviously a huge thing is it's shot with the IMAX cameras, which goes back to my criticism of Dead Reckoning, which isn't the film's fault. They didn't get the IMAX release. You're able to take in so much more seeing it on those bigger screens. I think for me, with this sequence in particular, I just think there's just nothing like it. Like Tom Cruise hanging off the plane, one hand on the satchel. The moment where it goes upside down, which obviously leads to Gabrielle's death, but them having a sequence where his snapped his arm, bent it backwards, rolling, just looks horrific.
Oh,
everything about it was just, for me, I think this sounds really ridiculous. I just feel very privileged. Like, we're going to talk about seeing that in a cinema, and for future generations, I'm not saying these films can't exist, like they'll see them. How Bond fans spoke about, oh my god, when I saw Moonraker when he came out of the plane and jumped out, like we're witnessing those historic things. I know that every generation is going to get their cinema moments.
Yeah,
but
I recall my parents talking about Spy Who Loved Me opening ski sequence all the time.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that.
That's how I feel like with these mission films, that if this is the last one, which I think it is the last one, to have the sequences we've had, I think and I think it's where the series has gone. Like they are going out on the highest. They've gone to the deepest parts of the earth, and now they're in the skies in the same film with the same cameras, the same actor doing this stuff. It is just incredible. There is no one like Tom Cruise working today, and any other film, they're not going to be allowed to use those biplanes. They're going to get told CGI them or use models. They're not definitely going to have the actors in them. Even a Harrison Ford wouldn't get away with doing that, and he's trained to fly those things. Yeah. So I just think, from a creative standpoint too, the fact the pair were even allowed, to do that, even when the plane burns up, and he then does the skydive to put the poison pill in. Everything went so well for me, and it's going to be something I keep going back to, and it's why, if I go back to sort of Act 1 again, it's why I'm able to slide with Act 1, because I am so happy and excited and thrilled. It's just this really weird thing with this opening act that I'm not saying I've got issues with it. Like, I had issues with it watching it in live time, but by the time I got to the end of that film, I'm fine with the opening because it has all been paid off and more. Is that fair, structure?
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. To say that, I mean, if you came out the film satisfied and you kind of ignore the bad parts because the good parts kind of overwhelm you, and
but this is, I don't think it's bad anymore. That's what makes it weird.
When you leave the film, it's like the last thing is the thing that's going to stick with you the most, and that sequence coming at the very, very end almost makes you kind of forget about the first sequence. Then when you look back, you're like, well, if you wanted that plotline to go in that direction, you needed that setup. For me, it is slow, it is badly paced at the very, very start. I still think that, but at the same time, I'm still a film enjoyer. I can still, enjoy the film to a certain extent. Like I said, this isn't a bad film. I thought this film was good. I just didn't think it reached the highs of some of the other films in the franchise, especially part one, in my opinion. That's kind of, that's where it sits with me. And
I think it dwarfs part one for me, completely. But it also then enhances part one, like every part 1 and 2, right? If you get a good part 2, part 1 lifts with it. But I think I'm more inclined to put part 2 on. And I don't think that's recency bias. I
I would rather watch the stunts again and the action sequences, like the car chase and all of the other things from part 1, the introduction of the characters, the kind of mystery behind the entity, the mystery behind Gabriel's character, because now that I know that Gabriel's character doesn't get solved like in part 2, it's like, well, part 1 he's still a mystery, in part 2 he's a mystery, but he's dead. It's like,
You know the answer though, right? Like, surely that would change. If you watch part 1 now, I'd be really curious. Not going to make it. It's not like the Andor Rogue One thing, but I'd be really curious for your thoughts on part 1. Now you've seen part 2 done and dusted, whether that changed anything. Because again, like it's an interesting discussion, because I would say a lot of people, Scott from Spy Hards, he had a lot of issues with part 1 on release and still does. And the first thing he said to me was after part 2 was like, that was a lot better, which is fair enough. Like if you've loved all of them, just like one, I kind of get that. But I'm curious at other people when they eventually go back to watch part 1. Because obviously I did watch part 1 after, so I'm a bit like, the things that really work, but the things that not don't, because not much didn't work for me in part 1. It's a good conversation. I don't know. It's weird to talk about. We haven't done a proper spoiler discussion in so long.
No, we haven't.
But let's be honest, we're not going to go 2 hours on many films ever again.
No.
Is this the longest one since No Time to Die? Maybe that was 4 hours.
God, that was. We're
2 parts.
We are coming towards the end of this discussion.
Yeah,
we're not going for 2 hours. 4 hours. Sorry.
No, never again. And
never again.
If anyone wants some behind the scenes, it was so long that the stream had cut off our video and says you need to start a new recording, which has never ever happened on this channel, ever. Thank people about live on the internet. But if we move on from the stunts, where we'll sort of round out this bit, before we give our final thoughts on the film, is there any scene you want to chuck in, you want to talk about that we haven't, that you've missed, or do you want to head into final thoughts? I feel like I've discussed everything I can without giving my final thoughts on the film.
Yeah, I've kind of done that as well. There aren't really too many other notable scenes. There are crossing scenes and stuff like that, but nothing that really, really stands out for me that we haven't already discussed. So
that's fair. Okay, final thoughts. Well, this is gonna be tricky. Mission Impossible: Final Reckoning. Will go down in history as one of the best action films ever made, with some of the greatest stunts ever performed by one of the biggest stars in film history. I think that's not recently biased to state that's going to be a discussion as part of arguably the greatest action series ever made, which I think is very fair to say that, reflecting on Mission Impossible, if this is the final film in this series, hands down. I know I don't like Mission Impossible 2. I cannot think of another series that's quality and has not like as many films. Like if you move aside from trilogies, when you get into franchise territory, I think there are very, very few that have had the consistency of this series, with some of the incredible actors that have been involved, different directors bringing on different ideas, and it being continuously elevated by the performers around it. As the actors have got older, the films have got better, which doesn't tend to happen either. I think this is a fitting finale. And I think it is a spectacle that at this point in time, you've obviously seen the film if you're still watching. If you haven't seen it in an IMAX, go to a fucking IMAX and see it. Get to the biggest one you can or the closest one you can. If you haven't seen it in this format, you are legitimately missing out on a part of what this is. And whilst it isn't as, the kind of thing I said to my dad was, when he picked me up from the train station after London last Wednesday, we were having a chat. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything because they're really excited to watch it. I just said, once you get past the first 40 minutes, I'm with it. And that's kind of the polite mentality I've had to people. But the second viewing today really changed that for me. That I think, I don't want to give it now, this may be the end game to the Mission Impossible franchise. This may be the one people, regardless of, I've seen casual people who aren't film people who are on my socials that are like football fans say this is the best action film they've ever seen, which didn't expect that from like non-film fans. But what the general audience determine, I guess we never really know. But for me, at least, it is on par with the top Mission Impossible films. And yeah, a ranking would be fucking something, but don't know how.
Yeah.
There's only 8.
Yeah. My final thoughts, not as positive in general. I thought the film was good. I don't think it gets anywhere near the heights of the franchise that it had been. I still have issues with, the slow runtime at the start. I still have issues with kind of some of the directorial choices and some of the editing choices in the film. It's it's a good film to the franchise, but it doesn't quite stick the landing as much as, you know, some of the other films do just in general. And for me personally, I would prefer to watch others on rewatch. I will probably go back and rewatch this film for some of the action sequences. You know, I'll rewatch it for the submarine sequence. I'll even rewatch it for the plane sequence at the end, because even though I've given critique to it, I still find it quite impressive. Like, the stunt itself is very impressive, it just doesn't impact me in the same way. But I didn't enjoy this as much as part one. If it is the end of the franchise, it is a good end to the franchise. It closed the book quite nicely. But I wouldn't put it up there and say it was the best in the franchise. Wouldn't even say the action was the best in the franchise from this film in particular. And I guess the final point is this film doesn't have Henry Cavill shotgunning his fists, so it can't be the best in the franchise in general. That's I guess my kind of opinions on it. I still thought it was a good film. I just feel like there is a lot more that it could have given, and it was lacking in certain areas.
That's very fair. So different thoughts from us, which has been great to discuss. It's been hard not to talk about this film to people because, again, when you're lucky seeing things early, you don't get the chance to talk to people, and you have to hold in stuff for a while. So multiple viewings is going to be interesting with this. I'm very curious to see what time does for this film too. I know obviously it will probably come out on Blu-ray by Christmas. Do you know what I need? I need a Mission Impossible 8 film 4K Steelbook box set, please, and thank you very much. It is the final film, so give me an actual box. I've got the recent 2 on 4K, but I didn't rebuy the others because I knew there'll be a lovely box set when it's done. But yeah, that's everything I've got to say on Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. We do want to hear from people at home. Thank you so much, Kai, who's been commenting with us on the stream as always. People, if you're not watching live, I do want to hear your thoughts on this, so you're more than welcome to comment your thoughts. We will reply to those. It is a spoiler discussion, so you're more than welcome to put spoilers in your comments, whether you liked it, whether you didn't, things that worked, things that didn't work. We will look at those. We will reply to those. If you're curious at what is to come, well, right now, this kind of was the year. I've moved into 2025 thinking all I've really thought about was Mission Impossible film-wise and Andor and Last of Us TV-wise. Andor has now finished. The Last of Us finishes tomorrow here in the UK. On a Monday morning at 2 a.m., sorry. So we are planning stuff. We know we're going to be doing the Pixar retrospective in November. There is a Pixar film coming out soon, which I guess we could share thumbnails and stuff for people at home. But the Toy Story is getting its 30th anniversary, 31 films to do, 31 weeks later takes us to Toy Story 5. The greatest coincidence in film history on the presumption Toy Story 5 doesn't change its release date because the anniversary date cannot change either. So when we've got stuff to announce, we put them on our social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and now Blue Sky, all of which you can get to our link tree, which is in our description. A link to our other Mission Impossible retrospective videos from 2 years ago. It's a lovely little place on our channel. We had some really good guests that contributed on them, and it will be very exciting to do with the Pixar one later this year to start bringing back some other people, some new faces, familiar faces. That'll be a humongous series with a big undertaking, so do stick around for that. But other films, it's blockbuster season. We had trailers for Jurassic Park, Fantastic Four, F1, How to Train Your Dragon. There's so many big films coming out. There's going to be a lot of new reviews on the channel. When those do go up, obviously, we'll put them on our feeds and the video will be on the YouTube. So thank you all so much for watching, for sticking with us on this video, for looking at all our other Mission Impossible videos. I'm not smart enough to do this message or self-destruct transition. Fortunately, I cannot do that. But this is how we will round out. So thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.